Chapter 774. Kill. After making his decision, Amu Gulang was the first to whip his horse and charge towards the countless mercenaries. Beside him, the 500 Tatar cavalrymen seemed to have been influenced by him and charged forward with a loud roar. "General Su He, I'll leave this place to your Tatar cavalry. Soldiers of the independent regiment, follow me and charge from both sides." Tiger's Mane saw through Amu Gulang's intentions with a single glance. Since the other party wanted to die for a righteous cause, then he would fulfill his wish. How could Tiger's Mane pay too much attention to an enemy general who wouldn't surrender? After shouting at Su He, he and Vice Commander Xian Honghai led their troops from the left and right, leaping over Amu Gulang's 500 cavalrymen and charging forward. Amu Gulang also didn't have any thoughts of stopping Tiger's Mane. He had already seen Su He coming from the front and knew that this was his opponent. He immediately brandished his long sword and charged forward. Both sides didn't have any intention of retreating. Like two high-speed mad bulls, they collided with each other in the next moment. Then the cavalrymen intertwined with each other and the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. Clanking sounds could be heard as the cavalrymen fell from their horses one after another and died on the battlefield. After a charge, when both sides turned their horses around, they saw the corpses of more than 200 cavalrymen on the battlefield. 90% of these corpses belonged to Amu Gulang's men. 500 against 3,000, there was a great disparity in military strength. In addition, the sabers in the hands of the Tatar cavalry were very sharp. Once Amu Gulang's men clashed with them, the sabers would often break after 5 or 6 strikes. At that time, they would only be at the mercy of the enemy. In just one clash, they had lost more than 200 soldiers. Nearly half of their forces had been lost. Aghast could be seen in Amu Gulang's eyes. But then his face turned red and he shouted again, "Follow me and kill." The second clash began. Sabers were waved, shouting, and warhorses neighed. There were 3,000 people on one side and 200 on the other. Once again, they clashed. Amu Gulang brandished his 3-meter-long blade, continuously slashing about. He had exchanged blows with at least 7 mercenaries, killing 2 of them on their horses. However, he was also tired to the point where he was gasping for breath. When he turned around to look at his horse again, he saw another 200 or so corpses on the battlefield. Most of them were still his subordinates. "General, I'm afraid we can't hold on any longer." It was still the same bodyguard. He seemed to be quite lucky to have held on until now. However, the others were not so lucky. There were originally 500 cavalrymen, but now there were only about 50 left. Not only that, but most of them were also injured. Even without the soldiers' reminder, Amu Gulang could see that the situation was very unfavorable. However, for Amu Gulang, who had long been prepared to die, this was just a matter of asking for mercy. "How many of them did we kill?" "You've seen it clearly." Although he knew that he was about to die, Amu Gulang was still concerned about the number of enemies he had killed. Perhaps this was the reason why he insisted on fighting to the death. Even if he died, he would drag some of them down with him. This, may be less than 30 people. The soldier's eyesight was not bad, but because of this, he saw a little too clearly and said some hurtful words. "Less than 30 people?" Hearing this answer, Amu Gulang's face flashed with a very awkward expression. Of course, this was because his military strength was not as good as the enemy's. However, more than 400 people died, and less than 30 of the enemy's men were killed. This result was still unacceptable to him. He was very sad. Could it be that this was the price he had to pay in exchange for his blood? Were the mercenaries really so powerful? Amu Gulang could be considered a general. At least, his will to fight to the death was not something that some people could compare to. The Tatar cavalry he led could also be considered to be good at fighting. However, when faced with the valiant mercenaries, they were at an absolute disadvantage in terms of numbers and weapons. The outcome of this battle was already set in stone. Su He originally had the talent of a general. Otherwise, Yang Chendong would not have spent so much effort to recruit him. In addition, the Tatar cavalry he led were the most elite forces in Aga Dorji's hands. Recently, they were equipped with the new sabers. It could be said that they were like a tiger that had grown wings. Moreover, during this period of time, they ate well, and the intensity of their training was several times stronger than before. Their strength was also many times stronger than before. Under such conditions, how could they be defeated? Even if nearly 30 people were killed or injured, this was because Amu Gulang and his soldiers were good at martial arts. Otherwise, the price of nearly 30 people would not have been paid. Amu Gulang's heart was sad, but he did not have time to think too much. On the opposite side, Suhi had once again led the army to kill them. As if he knew that Amu Gulang was not willing to die, he did not even have the intention to persuade him. Kill. Although there were only 50 brothers left, Amu Gulang still did not have the intention to retreat. After a loud shout, he once again waved the 3-meter-long saber and rushed forward. This time, his target was Suhi. Generals against generals, this was a kind of challenge, but also a kind of determination. It showed that Amu Gulang had given up on the road of survival and was determined to severely injure Suhi before he died. After all, Suhi was Aga Dorji's most trusted general. His status was far higher than Amu Gulang's. Even in terms of personal strength, Suhi was much stronger than Amu Dorji. He knew that the opponent was stronger, but he still wanted to challenge. This kind of courage had already explained everything. Leave this person to me. You guys go and deal with the others. Suhi also saw Amu Gulang's determination to fight to the death. He immediately decided to help him. He glanced at Gu Shan and the others who were protecting him. Gu Shan and the others had to obey the general's order. After a sound of agreement, they rushed to the other enemies. For a time, the battlefield became a vacuum. Suhi stood with his saber, waiting for Amu Gulang to approach. In the distance, a man and a horse were approaching quickly. The 3-meter-long broadsword had already been raised. When they were 3 meters away from Suhi, the broadsword fell from the air and pressed down with the whistling sound of the wind. Clenching the saber in his right hand, Suhi stared at Amu Gulang's every move. When the saber fell, he moved sideways and raised his saber to cut it. Under the powerful arm, the collision of the two weapons caused a spark. Under the huge force, the saber was indeed crooked. Under the collision of the saber, it almost fell out of his hand. Forcibly holding the 3-meter-long saber, Amu Gulang's face showed a shocked expression. He had long heard that Suhi was an all-rounder. Before, he didn't take it seriously. It wasn't until he really fought with him that he realized that a famous general was indeed a famous general. Sure enough, he wasn't so easy to deal with. The saber fell and also narrowed the distance between the two sides. At this moment, the advantage of the saber was revealed. As the saying goes, an inch shorter is an inch more dangerous. At close range, the horse-chopping blade that was only a meter long was able to fully display its agility. Under the incessant chopping from top to bottom, it caused Amu Gulang's mind to be thrown into disarray. Numerous wounds appeared on his body. If it was someone else who was cut by the sharp saber, they would have fallen off the horse and been defeated. But Amu Gulang was determined to die. He was completely relying on his spirit to make a final resistance. He had already ignored the wounds on his body. He thought that if he could kill Suhi, even if he died, it would be worth it. In Suhi's eyes, Amu Gulang's unwillingness to fight to the death made him reveal a look of admiration. But this was a battlefield, not making friends. Although he was shocked by the opponent's determination to fight to the death, Suhi's hands didn't stop. Not only did he wave the saber forward, he also found an opportunity to grab the back of the saber and held it in his hand. If it was under normal circumstances, if Suhi dared to be so arrogant, Amu Gulang only needed to use all his strength to regain control of the weapon. It was not impossible for him to take the opportunity to seriously injure Suhi. But now, he was already covered in scars. His strength was almost exhausted. Facing Suhi's huge strength, he was already powerless to resist. With his saber restrained, Amu Gulong could only passively take the beating. After instinctively dodging 2 sabers, the saber fell on his chest for the 3rd time, penetrating his chest. While blood flowed out, the vitality in Amu Gulong's eyes quickly disappeared. With a saber in his chest, Amu Gulong's strength was also exhausted at this moment. He glanced at Su He, who was riding on the horse next to him. He wanted to say something, but his mouth couldn't make any sound except for blood foam. With a plop, Su He's left hand loosened the saber, and Amu Gulong fell from the horse. Even if he died in battle, at that moment, he still opened his eyes wide and looked at the sky. It seemed that he still wanted to say, "Great Khan, I didn't let you down. I fought until the last drop of blood." Amu Gulong died in battle. The last 50 cavalrymen left by his side also died under the siege of Gushan and the others. But it was worth mentioning that no matter how Gushan tempted them with words, none of the 50 men surrendered. In the end, they fought until the last drop of blood was shed and died. The attack of the independent regiment led by Tiger's man was also very smooth. First, they launched a surprise attack with the muskets, which destroyed the enemy's morale and killed nearly 1,000 cavalrymen. Then, the mortars showed their prowess. The chaotic bombardment disrupted the enemy's formation and dealt them a heavy psychological blow. When the independent regiment came, it was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Tatar cavalrymen, whose morale had fallen to the bottom, became a turtle in a jar, a fish in a net. Those who surrender can live, those who resist will be killed. Tiger's man shouted, and the soldiers of the independent regiment also shouted. During this period, as long as there was resistance, they would swarm up together. Several sabers would come at the same time. No Tatar cavalryman could withstand such power. There was no other choice but to die. Chapter 775. I surrender. Seeing that the general situation was about to change, not even knowing whether the main general Amu Gulong was alive or dead, facing the impressive momentum of the independent regiment, the Tatar cavalry finally threw down the weapons in their hands, jumped off their warhorses, and knelt on the ground. Under the pressure, more and more people chose to surrender. They weren't like Amu Gulong, who had received favors from the Great Khan. They joined the army just to make a living. Besides, didn't they see that there were also Tatar cavalry among the mercenaries? Didn't they also surrender? Since there was a precedent, when it came to surrendering, no one seemed to be so resistant. Of the 5,000 Tatar cavalry, 2,000 were killed, and 3,000 surrendered. Tiger's man Su He's troops only lost less than 150 people, not even a tenth of the enemy's. This was definitely a great victory. Come, take the captives away. Watch them carefully, but don't abuse them. Everyone else, push the cannons up and prepare to attack the city. After dealing with the 5,000 enemy cavalry, Tiger's man's gaze fell on the city of Tulu. He had given the young master a military order yesterday, saying that he would definitely take down the city today. He couldn't go back on his word. For others, it was undoubtedly difficult to take down a city in one day, or even impossible. However, for Tiger's man who had cannons and muskets, this was nothing. Below the city walls of Tulu, Shibi saw everything that happened below. Especially when he saw Amu Gulong die on the battlefield, his eyes quickly became moist. Speaking of which, Shibi was a chess piece that the Great Khan had placed beside Amu Gulong to monitor him. In other words, from a certain point of view, they weren't trusted. It was just that he could see that Amu Gulong didn't want to believe it. In the end, it was the so-called art of balance, which was why the relationship between the two wasn't very good. But no matter what, they had worked together for a while. Seeing Amu Gulong die in front of him, he more or less felt sad. General Amu Gulong, with your death, my mission is complete. Next, I will do my best to defend the city, but he didn't continue, because he had already made up his mind. But he still wanted to see the true strength of the mercenaries. He looked at the Tatar soldiers on the city walls and shouted, "Everyone, prepare your bows and arrows. Once the enemy gets close to the city, shoot them back." Using bows and arrows to defend a city was the most commonly used method of defending a city. If it was summer, they would also get some kerosene and catapults, which would greatly increase their defensive capabilities. The archery ability of the Tatar soldiers was still very strong. At the very least, their accuracy was much higher than the Ming Dynasty army. This was related to the environment they grew up in. Horses and bows were always indispensable. However, when facing mercenaries with firearms, everything was a different story. Send someone to tell them to open the city and surrender. Then, we won't hurt the soldiers and civilians in the city. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. Tiger's Mane looked at the Tatar soldiers on the city walls with a pair of binoculars, and said with a snort of contempt, "I'll do it." Vice Commander Wuxia Xianxia took the initiative to accept the task. He took a self-made iron horn and rode out alone. When he was 150 meters away from the city walls, he suddenly stopped, and then his loud voice had a chance to show off. "Soldiers on the city walls, listen up," as Wuxia Xianxia shouted. The expressions of the Tatar soldiers on the city walls changed again and again. At this time, many of them couldn't help but look at General Shibi. Obviously, they all knew that if General Amu Gulang's 5,000 cavalrymen were defeated, their 5,000 infantrymen without war horses would not be able to resist at all. If they continued to fight, they would die. If they surrendered, they might find a way to survive. How could Shibi not see the thoughts of the soldiers on the city walls? But if he didn't even fight, he would be letting down the dead Amu Gulang. So he said loudly, "Brothers, I know what you're thinking. But after all, this is a siege, not a cavalry charge. I think we still have the strength to defend the city. If we can't win, it's not too late to surrender. I think you all still like the feeling of freedom." Shibi's understanding of the people's hearts was immediately met with a wave of support from the soldiers. At this moment, the Tatar soldiers standing on the battlements stared at the mercenaries on the city walls. It was as if they were saying, "If you want to come, we'll serve you with bows and arrows." Wuxia Xianxia shouted a few times but didn't hear any response. He patted his horse and returned to Tiger's Mane's side. He spread out his hands and said, "Tiger's Mane, they won't surrender." If they don't surrender, then we'll make them surrender. Men, prepare the cannons. Musketeers, go forward and fire 200 meters away. The rest of the cavalry, get ready to charge with me." Tiger's Mane said with a face full of confidence. With his muskets and cannons, he really didn't put Toulouse city in his eyes. The city walls were quickly prepared. 6 battalions, totaling more than 2,000 gunmen, slowly advanced. They stopped 200 meters away from Toulouse city. Then, they lined up in a straight line and aimed at the city wall. On the city gate tower, between the battlements, Shibi was leading thousands of Tatar soldiers to look down. Originally, they had prepared their bows and arrows to give the enemy a head-on blow. But when they saw the enemy stop 200 meters away, they all looked down curiously. They didn't know what the mercenaries were going to do next. They couldn't be blamed. Their understanding of muskets was completely based on the impression the Ming Dynasty gave them. At that time, muskets could only fire up to a distance of 100 meters. It wasn't much different from bows and arrows. The only difference was that it seemed to be more lethal. During the battle with the Ming Dynasty, because of the distance, they couldn't see clearly how Amu Gulang's cavalry was hit. The Tatar soldiers still had a confused expression. The 6 battalions of mercenaries didn't hold back. Most of them were auxiliary soldiers. Some of them even had the qualifications to take the cold front test. During this period of training, their strength had reached a new level. Now that they were facing an enemy close by, they were already full of fighting spirit. All they lacked was the order to open fire. Now, the order was finally given. Tiger's Mane raised his right arm and lowered it. The trumpeter beside him blew the bugle horn for permission to open fire. Immediately, the sound of gunfire rang out. Countless bullets flew towards the Tatar soldiers on Toulouse city as if they had eyes. The Tatar soldiers who didn't have the slightest bit of mental preparation and didn't take the musketeers seriously suffered a great loss. A second after the sound of gunfire rang out, a bloody scene appeared on the city tower. At least a few hundred soldiers were shot in the vitals because they didn't take any precautions. Only a few lucky ones managed to escape with their lives because the bullets missed and hit the battlements. Quick, squat down. Don't stick your heads out. The moment the gunfire rang out, Bear instinctively lowered his head and leaned against the battlements. Because of this, he managed to avoid a disaster. But when he saw that many soldiers were hit by the muskets because they didn't dodge and fell to the ground with their heads tilted to the side, he couldn't help but shout out loud. Facts speak louder than words. There was no need for Bear to shout. All the soldiers looked for a place to hide with a frightened expression. They were very surprised. What kind of musket was this? Not only could it hit so far, but it was also so accurate. In the face of such a weapon, who would dare to stick their head out and shoot? What was the difference between that and seeking death? Like the other soldiers, Bear's face also showed a frightened expression. He was a general, but he also only had one life. If he was hit by a bullet, he wouldn't be any better. All the Tatar soldiers found a safe place to hide, so they couldn't pose a threat to the mercenaries below the city. It was at this moment that the city tower seemed to tremble. The mortars had begun to show their might. After accurately aiming at the target, the two mortars fired simultaneously. One of the mortars hit the city gate of Talis City. After a loud bang, the seemingly heavy city gate was completely blown apart. Along with the city gate were dozens of Tatar soldiers who were holding huge logs against the city gate. Their task was to guard the city gate. The enemy was cavalry, so they shouldn't be good at sieges. With one side defending and one side attacking, the situation should be in their favor. They didn't expect that the mercenaries wouldn't be polite at all. With just a blast from the two cannons, the city gate was blown apart. They didn't even have the slightest intention of drawing out the distance. When the city gate was opened, the vice commander Xianxia on horseback roared and took the lead to charge into Toulouse city. Behind him were 5 battalions of 2,000 independent soldiers. Xianxia launched an all-out charge. The commander of the Tatar cavalry regiment, Suhi, also didn't want to be outdone. With a shout, he also led his troops to follow. While charging, he suppressed the shock in his heart. Heavens! The power of the mercenaries' cannons was too great. With such heavy weapons, what kind of city couldn't they take down? What kind of enemy could stop them? The general on the city tower was even more shocked. From the tremor, he could feel that the mercenaries should have opened the city gate. Now that he heard the sound of iron hooves, he was afraid that they were now rushing into the city. Once they entered the city, with the advantage of cavalry over infantry, how could he resist? At this moment, he suddenly felt powerless. He knew that Toulouse city had changed hands. Chapter 776. General, the cavalry used the cannons to blast open the city gates. They are now charging into the city. Our soldiers can't stop them at all. A Chiliarch frantically crawled over to Shibi, who was still hiding behind a battlement, and spoke with an urgent expression. Can't stop them? Shibi seemed to be talking to himself. Yes, we can't stop them. Many of the soldiers below the city had already surrendered. Actually, we can't blame them. The difference in strength between the two sides is too great. Plus, our brothers haven't had a full meal for a long time. We even killed more than half of our warhorses. We don't have enough strength to continue fighting with them. The Chiliarch explained to the soldiers below. After Tuachuo Buhua was ambushed by Yeshen and his brother Agar Dorje, he retreated under the protection of his loyal general. From that moment on, the 10,000 Tatar soldiers guarding the city of Toulouse no longer had any supplies. As a rootless tree, in order to save themselves, they first launched an attack on the northern Ming territory by raiding grain and grass. However, not only did they not manage to steal much, they were also surrounded by the cavalry sent out by the northern Ming's Wanquan department. If it weren't for the Tatar cavalry's bravery, they would have suffered a great loss. Since Bai Ming's side didn't gain any benefits, they could only target the grasslands and rob some of the herdsmen. However, this kind of behavior quickly forced the people of the grassland nearby to flee even further away. When the food in the city became less and less, Amu Gulang had no choice but to order the slaughter of the horses. This was also the reason why there were 10,000 Tatar soldiers but only 5,000 cavalry. Half of the missing horses were eaten by the Tatar soldiers themselves. They knew their own situation best. If the mercenaries were ordinary, the Tatar soldiers might be able to muster up the courage to fight and maybe even steal some food from them. But now, facing the mercenaries who were clearly stronger than them, they would die if they continued to resist. Knowing this, it wasn't a big deal that some soldiers chose to surrender. Sigh, since the soldiers below the city have surrendered, let's surrender too. Tell the brothers to stop resisting and surrender. Shibi let out a long sigh as if he had made a very difficult decision. After saying these words, his whole body relaxed. It was as if from this moment on, he had put down a heavy burden on his body. White flags were suddenly hung on the city walls of Toulouse City. Under the sunlight, they looked pale and powerless. When Tiger's Mane saw this scene, he laughed loudly. The Tatar soldiers have surrendered. Enter the city. The mercenaries entered the city more than 2 hours earlier than planned. Tiger's Mane's original plan didn't fully unfolded. This made him full of disdain for the 5,000 Tatar soldiers guarding the city. The way he saw it, even with the advantage of the city, the resistance was so weak. The general guarding the city was too incompetent. However, all of this changed because of what he saw after entering the city. When Tiger's Mane entered the city, Su He and Xian Honghai had already completely controlled the situation here. Even Shibi and the others were brought down from the city tower. They knelt on the ground and waited for Tiger's Mane to inspect and inspect. Riding a tall horse into the city, Tiger's Mane originally wanted to ridicule the enemy's general and suppress the enemy's morale. But when his eyes fell on Shibi and the soldiers beside him, he was surprised to find that they didn't look like an army. They didn't look like the valiant and mighty grassland warriors at all. Each of them looked sallow and emaciated. Their clothes looked so big on their bodies. They looked like children wearing an adult's robe. It was so inappropriate. Of course, the Tatar soldiers weren't so poor that they didn't even have clothes to wear. The reason for this was because they were malnourished for a long time. They didn't have enough food to fill their stomachs. As a result, each of them had lost a few kilograms or more. This made them look so out of place with the clothes they were wearing. Tiger's Mane rode on his horse. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Commander Su He seemed to understand something. He rode his horse to his side and said, Tiger's Mane, I've already asked around. These soldiers haven't eaten for a long time. They even used their horses to fill their stomachs. Speaking of this, Su He couldn't bear to see her like this. For the grassland warriors, the warhorses were their brothers. Most of the time, the horses would be there if the men were still alive, and if the men were dead, the horses would also die. If they were to use their brothers as food, one could imagine how bad the environment would be. Not to mention, horse meat was sour and didn't taste very good. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, who would make such a decision? This. Sigh. Arrange for the food to be cooked immediately. At least let them eat their fill first. Tiger's Mane suppressed all the words he wanted to say. He finally understood why the Tatar soldiers, who always looked powerful, were so useless today. Presumably, without food, even if they were mercenaries, how much of their strength could they display? Su He thanked Tiger's Mane on behalf of these soldiers. Hearing Tiger's Mane's order, Su He sighed. No matter what, he was still a Tatar. He was connected to these people by blood. Of course, he didn't want to see his own people in such a pitiful state. Seeing Su He's touched expression, Tiger's Mane chuckled. Okay, go and pass down my order. Oh right, the commoners should be starving. Pass down the order to make a portion for them. Try to let everyone eat their fill. Yes. Su He once again cupped his fists and thanked him. Then, as if he remembered something, he quickly saluted again and quickly rode away. Warm tears flowed out from the corners of his eyes. This time, he was really touched by Tiger's Mane's actions. The news of the victory reached Yang Chendong, who was slowly moving. Looking at the battle report, Tiger's Mane took down the entire Toulouse city at the cost of less than 200 casualties and captured nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers. Yang Chendong laughed. Not bad, Tiger's Mane did a good job. It looks like he has the talent to be a general. Seeing that Yang Chendong was in a good mood, Beta Persei quickly flattered him. That's right, Tiger's Mane is actually very capable of leading an army. After all, he has been by the young master's side for so long. Of course, there was another subtext to this sentence, which was that he had been by the young master's side for a long time and was also a talented commander. Naturally, Beta Persei wouldn't say these words out loud. He didn't forget the choice Yang Chendong gave him. He could either go down and be a regiment commander and lead an army, or he could obediently stay by his side. At that time, he chose the latter without hesitation. Towards Yang Chendong, besides admiration, Beta Persei also felt gratitude. Because without this master, he might not even know where he would be right now, or whether he was alive or dead. It was precisely because of the sixth young master that he was able to bring him such wonderful things. Now that he was about to have a woman, the gratitude in his heart grew even stronger. He would never leave Yang Chendong's side, but if there was a chance to lead an army to the battlefield, he would also yearn for it. After all, men had such primitive impulses in their bones. Yang Chendong chuckled and didn't make any comments on Beta Persei's words. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "If that's the case, speed up the march. We'll rest in Toulouse city today." The distance wasn't very far to begin with. In the afternoon, Yang Chendong and more than 1,000 people arrived at the foot of the city and entered the city together with Tiger's Mane and the others who were waiting there. Along the way, Tiger's Mane also gave a simple report on the battle that had happened. Previously, the scout had already reported the situation to Yang Chendong. Now, he just had to repeat it. Tiger's Mane spoke very quickly. After he finished talking about the battle, his expression became a little depressed. "Young master, the people here don't have it easy." Hearing Tiger's Mane say that the Tatar soldiers guarding the city didn't have it easy, Yang Chendong's face revealed a very strange expression. Why did he suddenly speak up for the other party? "Young master, the situation is like this." With a serious face, Hu Mang recounted everything he had seen after entering the city, as well as everything he had learned about the situation. When he said that the Tatar soldiers in the city hadn't eaten a full meal for a long time, and that they had to kill war horses to satisfy their hunger, and that some of the people in the city had to trade their children for food in order to survive, Tiger's Mane clenched his teeth and clenched his right hand tightly. He had a very pained expression on his face. Yang Chendong's face darkened when he heard the words "trade their children for food." Of course, he knew what this meant. Although he had been in this world for a few years and had seen many poor people, when he heard these words, he was still very moved. In his mind, he could even imagine what kind of situation the people had to be in to do such a thing. It must be quite a lot of helplessness, right? Presumably, the parents who did this would feel guilty for the rest of their lives, right? "Young master, I have already given the order to take out our rations and let the surrendered soldiers and the people have a full meal first. Please don't punish us." Tiger's Mane's voice sounded again, but when he said this, he already looked like he was asking for forgiveness. Speaking of which, it was reasonable to distribute the military rations to the surrendered soldiers. After all, these people might become his comrades in the future. However, distributing the rations to the people, even some women, children, and the elderly, was not something that Tiger's Mane could casually decide. Most of these people didn't have the strength to truss a chicken, so even if they had it in their hands, it wouldn't be very useful. Although the mercenaries already had 2,000 mu of greenhouses in the first city, which could solve a part of the food problem, most of the food still had to be transported by sea from Red Nest City. The manpower and material resources required were too large. Now that the military rations were distributed like this, Tiger's Mane should ask for forgiveness. Chapter 777. Hey, what crime have you committed? Yang Chendong casually waved his hand. Although we don't have the ability to let all the people in the world live a good life and eat their fill, as long as we are willing to work hard, this problem will eventually be solved. What you did was not wrong. Thank you, young master. Tiger's Mane also knew that since he had been by Yang Chendong's side for so long, he could still make this decision. Even if he was wrong, he would not be punished too much. However, he also had to show the appropriate attitude, because from a certain point of view, he was a servant, and Yang Chendong was the master. Yes, not only did you not do anything wrong, but you also contributed greatly to being able to take down Tulu City at such a small price. Actually, with the current strength of the independent regiment, you already have the conditions to become a division. How about this? I will now order you to be the division commander of the independent regiment. Later, I will send a telegram to the military and political department of Qiqian City to let them organize the records. You should also put in some effort and report the names of the officers under you to them. Yang Chendong said with a chuckle. Tiger's Mane was his study companion. He had been following her since she was young, so she was very familiar with his temperament. Since he had such ability to command the army, of course he would do his best to promote him. Of course, he was the only one who knew if he had any other motives for doing this. Being promoted all of a sudden, Hu Mang was still in a daze. Beta Persei, who was at the side, had already come over with a smile on his face. Division Commander Tiger, congratulations. Remember to treat us to a meal later, Tiger's Mane only came to his senses after hearing this. While staring at Beta Persei, he also saluted Yang Chendong. Young master, I am someone by your side. This independent regiment is only a temporary proxy. I have no intention of leaving your side, young master. Tiger's Mane was not thinking about the position of a division commander. With his status, who would dare to treat him like that even though he was the captain? Even Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo of the 3rd Division of the Cold Front Division would respectfully address themselves as his subordinates whenever they met him. Since that was the case, it didn't matter whether he was a teacher or not. On the contrary, if he was forced to leave Yang Chendong because he gained a teacher, then the loss would outweigh the gain. I didn't say that I wanted you to leave. Yang Chendong tilted his head and glanced at Tiger's Mane. He chuckled and said, who said that you can't serve by my side after becoming a division commander? Alright, don't think too much about it. If I let you be a division commander, just do it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be right for a regiment commander to always be a senior colonel. Tiger's Mane didn't care about Yang Chendong's military rank. He only cared that the young master wouldn't let him leave his side. Therefore, when he heard this, he chuckled and revealed a face full of gratitude. Let's go. Don't just laugh foolishly. Accompany me to take a look around the city. Yang Chendong pushed his legs and rode forward. Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and the others behind him also hurriedly followed and headed towards Tulu City. Tulu City was indeed terrifyingly poor. From afar, there didn't seem to be anything other than some dilapidated and dangerous houses. Speaking of which, it was just like Alakamaki before he became the first city. He was so poor that he didn't even have anything. Young master, this place is too poor. Should we transform this into a second first city? Tiger's Mane's emotions had stabilized and he began to speak from a strategic point of view. There's no hurry. Yang Chendong slowly shook his head. How about this? Tell the people that if they don't want to stay here, they can arrange for them to live in the first city. As for this place, just leave the soldiers to guard it. Tulu City's geographical location was very important. According to Yang Chendong's previous intention, he wanted to occupy this important place and then build it into a city like the first city. But along the way, his thoughts had changed. After all, this place was too close to Baiming. 200 miles ahead was Baiming's Wanquan Department and Xian Mansion. If an accident happened, this place would become an isolated city. Not only did he need to arrange a heavy defense, but he also needed to be on guard against other people's attacks. This was not a good feeling and it was not something Yang Chendong was happy about. Therefore, he hadn't made a final decision about the future of this city. He still needed to take a look. Since Yang Chendong said that he wasn't in a hurry, Tiger's Mane naturally wouldn't say anything. He just nodded and remained silent. In fact, in the entire Yangxia, once it was Yang Chendong's decision, it was equivalent to the final decision. No one would dare to challenge his authority. The days in winter were very short. After just walking around the streets, the sky had already darkened. The largest house in the city had become the temporary Yang Mansion and Yang Chendong's temporary residence. After entering the Yang Mansion, Yang Chendong ate a hot meal while listening to the news from the scout. After reporting that Lu Zhua's 2nd Regiment and the 3rd Regiment of recruits had landed at the corner tonight, he raised his head and gave instructions. Tell Commander Lu to be careful. Although the Tatar army suffered a loss last night, it doesn't mean that they won't come to cause trouble. Yes, 6th young master. The scout received a reply, saluted and turned to leave. But as soon as he left, Tiger's Mane strode into the hall and came in front of Yang Chendong, who had already stuffed the last mouthful of rice into his mouth. Young master, Commander Su He is here. He said that he has something to report to you. Ask him to wait in the hall. Yang Chendong took the towel from Beta Persei, wiped his hands, and nodded lightly. Tiger's Mane's previous report said that when facing the Tatar soldiers during the day, the 3,000 Tatar cavalry regiment didn't have the slightest intention of going easy. This made him very happy. At least it proved that this person understood the big picture. Even so, he should be properly comforted and rewarded. Soon, in the side hall, Su He, who was wearing a black cloak, was led by Tiger's Mane to Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table. He immediately saluted and said respectfully, Commander of the Tatar Cavalry Regiment, Su He, reporting to the 6th young master. Su He, your Tatar Cavalry Regiment performed well today. I have already passed down the order. Each soldier will record a military merit once. Those who killed the enemy will be rewarded accordingly. As the commander of the regiment, you have contributed the most. You will be rewarded with an additional 1,000 taels of silver, a pack of cigarettes, and 10 jars of good wine. Seeing the energetic Su He, Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. Thinking back, he had spent some effort and even risked entering the camp to persuade the other party to work for him. Now, it seemed that everything was worth it. Thank you, 6th young master, for the reward. Su He saluted to show his gratitude. This made Tiger's Mane smile. However, this smile quickly changed because of Su He's next words. 6th young master, Su He does not dare to ask for a reward. If possible, these rewards can be returned. Su He has other requests. I hope that the 6th young master can fulfill my request. Tiger's Mane's expression changed. He actually dared to reject the 6th young master's reward. Wasn't this the same as slapping his face in front of everyone? In a fit of anger, he shouted at Su He, "What are you talking about? Don't forget your identity." Sigh. On the other hand, Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table, had a natural expression on his face. He did not show the slightest bit of unhappiness because of the other party's rejection of the reward. Instead, he asked with interest, "If you don't want the reward, then what do you want?" Su He's face was also red. Perhaps it was because of Tiger's Mane's reprimand, or perhaps it was because of Yang Chendong's smile. His heart could not help but beat like a drum. What kind of person was Yang Chendong? Although Su He did not have a complete understanding of him, the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty and Courage, the god of war, and the messenger of longevity heaven that the common people spoke of. Any one of these names alone had an illustrious reputation. Once such a person made a decision, how could he change his mind easily? Since he rejected the reward, the other party should be angry. However, this smile on his face made him even more puzzled. In fact, no one knew Yang Chendong's true identity. Even more so, they did not know that Yang Chendong did not attach much importance to some of the rules of the present age. Just like how he said before that there was no need to kneel when seeing him, all the soldiers who had undergone training were now used to this tradition. Perhaps in other people's eyes, rejecting a reward was a big deal. It was equivalent to rejecting the other party's good intentions. To put it more seriously, it was a slap in the face. If it was bestowed by the emperor, no matter if it was a gift or a marriage, if someone dared to reject it, it was equivalent to defying the imperial edict. That person's entire family would be beheaded. However, in Yang Chendong's eyes, he did not care about this at all. I gave you something to show that I think highly of you and reward you. If you don't want it, then I'll just take it back. This is not a big deal. This was Yang Chendong's true thought. He did not know this, which was why Tiger Mane was angry and why Suhi was so nervous. However, now that Yang Chendong had asked what he wanted, he had to say it even if his next words would anger the other party. Wasn't this the reason why Suhi had taken the initiative to come here? With a plop, Suhi did not salute but knelt on the ground. This action already showed his determination, and also seemed to indicate that what he was going to say next would not be so pleasant to hear. By the side, Hu Mang's expression changed as well. Instead of the military salute, she knelt down. What did Suhi want? Even Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Chendong, stared with a pair of tiger eyes. His whole body could not help but tense up. He was only waiting for the young master's next order to teach this Suhi a lesson. He would make him suffer and teach him a lesson. Yang Chendong's expression did not change at all when he knelt. He only narrowed his eyes for a moment. Then, he smiled gently and waited quietly. He was also very curious about what Suhi was going to say. Chapter 778. Suhi, who was kneeling with his head lowered, couldn't see the reactions of the others. After kneeling, he only wanted to say what he wanted to say. Sixth young master, Suhi requests that you properly collect Amu Gulong's corpse and send it to Tingri. Please spare the 8,000 captured Tatar soldiers. Although they opposed you before, they had no choice but to do so. Many of them had received kindness from Tuachuo Buhua Great Khan. They were just repaying their kindness. That's all. However, after today's battle, those kindness disappeared with the wind. I have talked with them and many of them are willing to join the mercenary army. I hope that the sixth young master can help them. After saying everything she wanted to say, Suhi lay on the ground again, as if she was prostrating herself on the ground. At the same time, she seemed to be saying that she had finished what she wanted to say. She could be dealt with by the sixth young master as he wished. After he finished speaking, the hall fell into silence. How was this one request? There were clearly several. Especially the matter of collecting Amu Gulong's corpse. In the eyes of the others, this was even more impossible. Since they were enemies, they had to be prepared to be beheaded. Moreover, who didn't know that the mercenary army loved to observe wherever they went? This was a great psychological deterrent. Not to mention, Suhi had already tried to persuade Amu Gulong to surrender. However, the facts proved that it was useless. Now that Amu Gulong was defeated, the mercenary army defeated him with their own strength. Why did they have to bury him properly? Tiger's Mane, who knew everything, had a puzzled expression. He looked at Suhi, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, Commander Su, don't you think you are too much? Amu Gulong is our enemy. Why do you want to bury the enemy's corpse properly? Also, how should we deal with the captives? Is this something that a commander like you can consider or even question? Don't think that you have made a great contribution by killing Amu Gulong today. Let me tell you, I don't even need the young master to make a move. I can easily deal with you. Moreover, the other soldiers of the Tatar cavalry regiment won't have any doubts. Do you believe me? Tiger's Mane wasn't exaggerating. Although the majority of the Tatar cavalry were Tatars, and they were the Tatar cavalry under the leadership of Agadorji. However, after a few months of training, especially the political studies that took half an afternoon every week, many people's mentality had changed. At the end of the day, everyone was only willing to follow Agar Dorji because they wanted to live a better life. Later on, he surrendered with Suhi and joined the mercenary group with the same mindset. Reality had proven that becoming a member of the mercenary group could solve the problem of food and clothing. Since that was the case, of course they would side with the mercenary group. Even if Su He had other thoughts and wanted to leave, there wouldn't be many soldiers who would make the same choice. In other words, the true leadership of Su He's Tatar cavalry regiment didn't lie with him as the commander, but with the higher-ups of the mercenary group, in the hands of young Master Yang Qindong. Su He was naturally very clear about this point as a famous general. He didn't doubt Tiger's Mane's words. He just lowered his head and said, "Commander Tiger, I don't want to do things based on merit. This is all my personal opinion and has nothing to do with the Tatar cavalry regiment. If you think I'm wrong, then punish me. I'll accept any punishment. Even if you want me to be an ordinary soldier, I'll accept the punishment. However, I hope that you and the 6th young master will seriously consider my request." Even though he knew this, Su He still didn't have any intention of relenting. This had already shown his determination. Because of this, Tiger's Mane didn't know what to say. He could only glare at him angrily. Then, he shifted his gaze to Yang Qindong, who was sitting at the head of the table. He believed that the 6th young master would have a way to resolve this matter. Yang Qindong had been listening attentively from the side. When he heard Su He's request and Tiger's Mane's reprimand, he didn't make a sound. Now that everyone was silent, he coughed lightly and said, "Tiger's Mane is right. Amu Gulang is our enemy. He didn't listen to persuasion and didn't take the opportunity we gave him seriously. Since he didn't take it, he's dead. Why should we collect the enemy's corpse? Commander Su, do you have any other reasons for this matter? Why don't you tell us?" Yang Qindong said this calmly, without the slightest trace of anger. However, it was precisely because of this that Su He, who was kneeling on the ground, understood that this was the 6th young master giving him a chance to explain. If he didn't take it, he might really be punished. Originally, surrendering was something that he was forced to do. He thought that he would just be wasting his time anywhere. Therefore, he decided to enter the mercenary camp and take a good look. If it didn't work out, he would just look for an opportunity to leave. However, he never thought that the moment he entered the mercenary camp, he would really be infected by the atmosphere here. Here, officers and soldiers were all equal. They were particular about punishment for mistakes and rewards for meritorious deeds. Moreover, the military discipline was strict and they would never make things difficult for ordinary citizens. Here, they could eat their fill, wear warm clothes, and have a beautiful future to look forward to. Wasn't all of this what he had been pursuing all his life? Su He naturally liked this place. He liked it from the bottom of his heart. Even if others wanted to chase him away, he was also sincerely unwilling. However, he still did it today because he knew that he had to do it. Now that the 6th young master gave him a chance to explain, he cherished it very much. He slowly raised his head and looked at Yang Qindong, who was sitting there with an expectant look, and said, "6th young master, I did it because it was not only my idea, but also the idea of the 8,000 captive Tatar soldiers. I have talked with this person and found that he is a rare talent. I wanted him to be used by the 6th young master, but he made this request, so." Su He didn't say what so, but he believed that the 6th young master would be able to guess it. Yang Qindong's expression didn't change much. When Su He knelt down and said the request, he already guessed something, and Su He's answer was no different from his guess. "Well, tell me in detail." "Yes, 6th young master. As far as I know, Amu Gulang was an orphan when he was young. His parents were killed by the enemy. He grew up eating the food of hundreds of families. Later, he met the great Khan Tuachuo Buchuo and was raised by him. He was someone the great Khan trusted greatly. Later, he was arranged to guard Toulouse city. Because of this, even though he knew that he had no chance of winning against the mercenaries, he still made the decision to fight. He wanted to use his life to repay the great Khan's kindness. Even though he knew that he would die, he still did it. Isn't this loyalty worthy of respect? Furthermore, this subordinate also learned from the other captives that when there was no food in Toulouse city, Amu Gulang did not rely on his status as a general to steal the soldiers' rations. On the contrary, he ate whatever the ordinary soldiers ate. He set a very good example, which also made him hold a very high position in the hearts of the soldiers. If we can properly collect his corpse, the other Tatar soldiers will definitely be grateful. This will play a better role in the future when we incorporate them into our forces. Of course, the reason why I made this request is to let go of this person. I originally thought that he was just a deputy general by Amu Gulang's side, but after a long conversation between the two of us in the afternoon, I realized that this person had lofty ambitions. In terms of the overall situation, even I was inferior to him. After that, I learned that this person also didn't have a good background. His mother was a Han, and his Mongolian bloodline wasn't pure. Therefore, he had no room to display his strength. Such a person should be the one the sixth young master took a fancy to. I advised him to follow the sixth young master, and he raised the issue of burying Amu Gulang properly. He also said that this was his promise. If he couldn't fulfill this promise, he would rather die. Wasn't such a loyal and affectionate person the sixth young master was looking for? That's why I boldly suggested this and asked the sixth young master to approve. After finally saying all the reasons, Suhi once again placed his head on the ground, looking like he was at his disposal. More than once, he mentioned the name of "I'm leaving." Even Yang Chendong was curious. He was very clear about Suhi's ability. He was already a rare warlord, and the person he admired must be outstanding. Beta Persei, go and bring that person called "I'm leaving." Seeing is better than hearing 100 times. Since Suhi described this person so well, Yang Chendong wanted to see if it was true or not. Beta Persei agreed and walked out. Not long after, he walked into the hall with a man with a thin face and big eyes. As soon as he entered, Beta Persei shouted in a loud voice, "This is the sixth young master, the god of war in your mouth. Kneel down. Greetings to the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty." After Beta Persei said these words, the "I'm leaving" had already obediently knelt down. On the contrary, Beta Persei, who was prepared to help the "I'm leaving," was stunned. He could only sigh in his heart, "At least you know what's good for you." He stood at the side and stared at him to prevent him from doing anything that would be detrimental to the young master. Yang Chendong did not pay attention to these small movements. Instead, his gaze fell on the extremely thin "I'm leaving." Rather than saying he was thin, it was better to describe him as thin as a match. It was only because his bones were wide that he did not give others the impression that he was very thin. Just like his big eyes, they might not have been that big originally. It was only because his face was too thin that it made his eyes look big. Chapter 779. With just one look, Yang Chendong could imagine what kind of life the 10,000 Tatar soldiers were living. According to Suhi, Shibi was second only to Amu Gulang. If even he was so thin, one could imagine what kind of life the other ordinary soldiers were living. These thoughts just flashed through his mind. Yang Chendong looked at Shibi, who was kneeling on the ground, and said, "I heard from Commander Suhi that your mother is Han. How can you prove it?" It was no wonder that Yang Chendong would ask such a question. He still valued Han blood. Wasn't there a saying? Those who were not of the same race would have different hearts. If it could be proven that Shibi was really a Han descendant and had the ability, he could be put in an important position. She did not expect Yang Chendong's first question to be this. She seemed to be a bit surprised that she was willing to part, but her expression quickly regained its calm. She then used a perfectly articulated voice to reply, "Duke of Loyalty and Courage, my mother once said that her ancestral home was from Suzhou. My mother's ancestors even had some wealth. However, because they later offended someone, the entire family was sent to the border. In one battle, the city was broken into. My mother also became a spoil of war. Later, she was snatched by my father and gave birth to me." After a series of explanations, Shibi smiled bitterly. "My parents are now gone. I know that there is no way to find out. However, when I was young, my mother liked to hum some Suzhou tunes when she was free. I unintentionally learned some. Now, I will sing it for Duke of Loyalty and everyone." Shibi didn't care if anyone was willing to listen. He started to sing. Although there were no instruments, even if he sang without the help of instruments, it still had a special charm. When Yang Chendong heard this, he roughly determined Shibi's identity. He had heard Suzhou's songs before. In the past, Lady Shui and Lady Xiang had often played them in front of him. Although Shibi was limited by the condition of his voice, the charm of it had been sung by him. This was very difficult. Think about it, if he didn't really hear about it or was influenced by it, why would a Tatar cavalry learn such a useless thing? Moreover, if one looked closely at Shbai's face, they would notice that he was different from the Mongols. For example, his skin color and expression were similar to many Han people. Not to mention, the Great Ming Dynasty and the Mongols had been at war for many years. There were many cases where the Great Ming Dynasty was involved in the war. Yang Chendong didn't have any doubts about his mother's identity as a Han, so he nodded. Okay, you don't have to think about your background. General Su, he said that you have extraordinary abilities. How can you prove it? Hee hee. Shibi chuckled. Commander Su, he is too kind. Actually, I'm just a captive. How could I have any ability? It's just that I have a different view of the current situation compared to others. The first part was just a polite remark. The second part was the most important thing. Naturally, it attracted Yang Chendong's curiosity. What do you think of the situation? Yes. Shibi solemnly replied and said, during the day, I was fortunate enough to meet Commander Suhi. We talked about the mercenary army. In my opinion, the mercenary army's growth is inevitable. In fact, no one can stop it. Why? Yang Chendong asked in a concise manner. There is only one reason. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is sincerely thinking for the common people. That's enough. His face was full of confidence. If one looked closely, there was even a sense of heroism. Shbai's voice became louder and louder. Looking at the entire grassland and even the world, there are countless people who claim to be working for the common people. However, how many of them can do it? On the grassland, the tribes are constantly fighting. Today, you fight me. Tomorrow, I fight you. The day after tomorrow, they fight you. In the end, it's all about fighting for resources and money. Who has truly thought for the common people? Who has seriously considered that what the common people really want is peace? Look at the Great Ming Dynasty. It seems that the land is tens of thousands of miles long, and there are many people. However, how many of the common people are able to have enough food and clothing? Are they truly satisfied? Especially in recent years, after the Great Ming Dynasty was divided into North and South, the people in power thought about how to unify the world and leave their names in history. In order to achieve these goals, they can only compete with the common people. They snatch gold, silver, and even rations from the common people. However, they don't know that doing so has already made them lose the hearts of the people. Even if they can unify the world one day, it will only be a temporary glory. They don't know that the common people are the foundation of a country. Only when their lives are truly good and their hearts are at peace, will the world be stable. Among them, many have long forgotten that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. At this time, Shbai was more like an old master talking about the general trend of the world. Many of the things he said were reasonable and well-founded. Even Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei, who were standing on both sides of him, nodded their heads in approval from time to time. Not to mention Yang Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the table. This was the first general he had come into contact with who put the hearts of the common people first. In the past, there were also people who talked about the hearts of the people. For example, Yu Qian was such a person. He cared about the lives of the common people very much and cared about their thoughts. Therefore, this person became the Castellan of Qiqian City. Facts had also proved that this person had done a very good job and had solved Yang Chendong's worries. And now, another person had appeared. It was conceivable that once Yang Chendong recognized this person's ability, he would be entrusted with an important task. That's right. At some point in time, Shibi had stopped his long-winded speech. His entire aura changed as well. He once again assumed the appearance of a sinner. He knelt there with his head lowered, looking like he was waiting to be dealt with. However, Yang Chendong's voice also sounded. He finally understood why He would rather not give him any benefits and bury Amu Gulang properly. It seemed like he also saw that Shbai was a talent. Yes, Shbai. You indeed have different knowledge from others. Since it's like this, are you willing to join the mercenary army? Yang Chendong said with a straight face. In ancient times, common people were not that important. Although there were many people who would often say it, reality had already proven that there were not many people who could really do it. This made Shbai's gaze even more shocking. Sinner is willing. But Sinner still has a request. Shbai's heart calmed down. He knew that his view should be the same as Yang Chendong's, so he took the opportunity to raise a request. Logically speaking, since he was already a sinner, he should not raise any conditions. However, it was obvious that Yang Chendong was in a good mood. Previously, He had fought a battle, so Yang Chendong was not angry. Instead, he chuckled, pass down the order, collect Amu Gulang's corpse and bury it properly. Allow 8,000 captives and the common people in the city to watch the ceremony. Considering that they have been malnourished for a long time, let them return to the logistics team of the first city and join the construction team. Let them work while recuperating. After they recover their fighting strength, we will consider joining the army. This matter will be handed over to Division Commander Tiger to handle. Yes. Tiger's mane hurriedly lowered his head and replied. Thank you, Duke of Loyalty. I have nothing else to ask for. I am willing to join the mercenary army and will never regret it. Without waiting for him to speak, Yang Chendong had already satisfied all his conditions. He immediately kowtowed to the ground again, indicating his determination. Ha ha ha, Yang Chendong laughed loudly. It could be seen that he was really happy this time. Tulu's city had been breached, so there was no distance between Yang Chendong and Baiming. Looking at the road to Xian Mansion, the situation seemed to have become even more complicated. Xian Mansion, it was not an exaggeration to say that Baiming was the northern gate of the capital. Once one entered here, one could pass through the wooden fortress and enter Huai Lai. After passing through the Jianghu Pass, one would be in the capital. Naturally, Baiming had also put in a lot of effort here. He had arranged for a large number of troops, and the command center of the Wangquan Metropolitan was in Xian Mansion. The Wangquan Metropolitan was the same administrative level as the new Gan Metropolitan. Metropolitan Commander Shi Wanshan was a second-rank military official in the imperial court. Not only that, he was also a scholar who was good at war and good at strategizing. This had to do with Shi Wanshan's background. His father was a scholar, and because he was forced to make a living, he was sponsored by a few wealthy gentry in the village to open a school. He only taught the children of the village, but he was truly capable and knew a lot. Whenever he spoke of something, others would quickly understand and accept it. It was precisely in this environment that Shi Wanshan had slowly grown up. Influenced by what he saw and heard, he began to understand many principles. He had originally wanted to follow his father's example and rely on what he had learned to obtain scholarly honors so that he could contribute to the great Ming. In truth, when he was only a teenager, he had inherited his father's mantle and become a scholar. He seemed to have a bright future ahead of him, but at this time, an incident occurred that changed the course of his life. In the second year after he became a scholar, a group of passing bandits suddenly attacked the village and killed many people. At that time, his father and family all died under the blades of the bandits. Because he was still young, he was taken away by the bandits as a laborer. In the end, he went up the mountain and became a coolie in the bandits' lair. There were dozens of young people who were taken up the mountain with him. In such an environment, they were scared to death. However, Shi Wanshan was the only one who was not afraid of power. He stood up and criticized the bandits for all kinds of wrong things, and even proposed all kinds of solutions. If one wanted to reason with the bandits, there was no difference between negotiating with the King of Hell. However, he was amazing because he could still propose some solutions to the problem. The bandits followed his suggestions and soon found that things had become much simpler. As a result, Shi Huanshan probably did not expect that he would be valued by the bandits. The defense of the mountain and how to develop in the future all fell into his hands. Chapter 780. Reality proved that gold would shine no matter where it was. Shi Huanshan suppressed the hatred in his heart and began to wholeheartedly help the bandits expand their power. At the same time, he also learned to blend in and learn some of the strengths of these people. Slowly, he learned martial arts with the bandits. Under his hard work, he gained a good ability. Then he used his knowledge to lead the bandits to clear out the nearby bandits one by one. In the end, he used more than 10 years to develop himself to a very powerful level. He himself also had a very high reputation among the bandits. It was also at this time that Shi Huanshan no longer suppressed himself. The seeds of hatred that had been planted in him for many years finally erupted. He led some of his trusted aides to kill the head of the bandit lair, which was the bad guy who had killed his family and fellow villagers. Then he took the head down the mountain and took the initiative to ask for punishment from the nearby yamen. He also told them about his background and the things he had done in order to take revenge over the years. Just like that, the local yamen, which had been a headache for the local yamen, was wiped out in one fell swoop. At that time, the yamen received a lot of money and other benefits from Shi Huanshan and reported this matter to the emperor at that time, Zhu Qizhen. The emperor was very pleased, and Shi Huanshan changed from a bandit to an official. Then he developed step by step in the army. In the end, he relied on the gold and silver he had accumulated as a bandit to pave the way. In addition to his extraordinary ability, he rose step by step. When the Tilma Castle incident came out, Shi Huanshan keenly grasped this opportunity. Not only did he vigorously support the acting emperor, Zhu Qiyu, in his actions, he also used gold and silver to pave the way. Finally, he contacted the chief eunuch, Jining, and expressed his admiration. Finally, step by step, he became the commander of the Department of 10,000 Affairs, a dignified second-grade military official. The history of Shi Huanshan's rise to power was somewhat bizarre and complicated. However, he was proficient in both civil and military affairs. He was also generous with his money. Very quickly, he gained a firm foothold. Not only did he have a high position in the military, but he also enjoyed a good reputation among the civil officials. After all, he was a scholar, and his father was also a scholar. In a way, he could be considered a descendant of a scholarly family. For revenge, he had endured for many years, which was in line with Confucianism. Such a person was more likely to be trusted by the civil officials than other military generals. It was also because Shi Huanshan was strong that in the year he was in charge of the Wan-Al division, there were rarely any Mongol cavalry around the Xian manor that he was in charge of. The only time Mu Wengilang led an army to attack him, he was easily defeated by him, which further established his reputation. Shi Huanshan was naturally overjoyed to be able to achieve such brilliant achievements at the age of 35. He always had a smile on his face and was called amiable by his subordinates. However, in the past few days, the smile on his face had obviously lessened by a lot and was replaced by a kind of worry. News of Talu's capture had already spread. This meant that he would no longer have to face the Tatar cavalry, but the mercenary army that gave him a headache. Shi Huanshan had naturally heard about the mercenary army. It was precisely because of the appearance of this army that the northern Ming dynasty's regime was saved from collapse, allowing it to display its vitality once again. Although Shi Huanshan had not taken part in the defense of the capital, he had still understood the situation from the mouths of many people. He had always thought highly of the firearms used by the mercenary army and the extremely strong military quality of the mercenary soldiers, and he was also somewhat fearful of them. The mercenary army had been tormenting the southern Ming Empire, and it was said that they had even conquered 2 small countries. Shi Huanshan had also paid attention to these matters, but because he was too far away, he did not feel much pressure. But now, the mercenary army was right in front of him. It was not something that he could avoid just because he did not want to. In the residence of the prefectural commander of Xuanfu City, Shi Wanshan summoned 2 of his deputies, Commanders Ancient River, a minor rank 2 general, and prefectural commander Ning Wenfeng, a major rank 3 general. The 3 of them were seated in a side hall, drinking wine. With Shi Wanshan's methods, it didn't take long for the 2 deputies to submit to him. It could be said that they listened to his every word. Therefore, when the 3 of them met, they didn't care about etiquette. This was also the reason why they met in the side hall instead of the main hall. You already know the situation. Tell me what you think. Shi Wanshan lightly tapped the jade table with his right hand, his gaze passing between Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng. What else can we do? After all, the Duke of Loyalty was conferred by the Emperor. Since they conquered Toulouse City, it's the same as helping us conquer Toulouse City. Send someone to take over the city's management rights. Commander Ancient River's voice was loud and clear as he spoke very casually. No. After he finished speaking, the commander Ning Wenfeng at the side immediately waved his hand. As his name suggested, Ning Wenfeng did not seem like an ordinary general. Instead, he had the elegance of a scholar. In fact, without knowing his position, very few people would associate him with a general. In fact, his skills on horseback were quite good. He was also someone who was both civil and martial. Back then, in order to subdue him, Shi Wanshan had spent a lot of effort. At the very least, he had put in more effort than when he had subdued Ancient River. It was precisely because he had put in so much effort that this person's abilities were proven. When Ning Wenfeng said no, Shi Wanshan slightly raised his eyebrows. His eyes flashed with an appreciative smile. It was clear that he already knew what the other party meant. Gu He, on the other hand, asked casually, "Can't? Why not? Don't tell me that the Duke of Loyalty dares to defy the imperial court's decree? No matter how powerful he is, does he dare to openly oppose our Baiming?" The words, "openly oppose," already proved that Ancient River had seen through the mystery. He was not a stupid person. Thinking about it, if he was a stupid person, how could he become a second-rank military official? How could Shi Wanshan have spent so much effort to subdue him? Haha. Ning Wenfeng giggled in response to Ancient River's question. Knowing the other party's temperament, he knew that the other party was not targeting him and was just stating the facts. He continued, "Toulouse City's location is very important, just like our Xian Manor. It can be considered one of the gateways for the Mongolian cavalry to enter our northern Ming. With them here, we only need to keep an eye on their movements to stabilize the situation. This is also the main reason why we have not attacked Toulouse City for so long. Otherwise, a city defended by only 10,000 people, how hard do you think it is to chew on a bone?" When he said this, Ning Wenfeng's face was filled with arrogance. It could be seen that he was also a conceited person. The reason why they did not attack Toulouse City before was because they considered the importance of its location. Once they broke through, they would have to face even more attacks and harassment from the Mongol cavalry. No matter how they looked at it, it was not worth it. Rather than taking down a useless city, it would be better to place it right under their noses. It would be safer. Ning Wenfeng's words received a nod from Shi Wanshan and Ancient River. Clearly, the 3 of them had the same opinion on this matter. Then Ning Wenfeng continued, "Now that the mercenaries have taken down Toulouse City, we'll just give it to them. With them in front of us, we can sit back and do what we want to do without any worries. Didn't the commander say to the court that we want to form and train a new army?" Although we did not get a reply, we did not put in much effort and were only probing. I think we can increase our efforts and think about the practical problems. Ning Wenfeng's words could be said to have pointed out the current situation. What he said was very similar to Shi Wanshan's thoughts. This also caused the commander to laugh heartily. That's right, Wenfeng's words are extremely correct. With someone guarding the gate for us, we can free up our hands and do more things. How about this? I will immediately write a memorial and greet some of the important officials in the court. It should be time for the new army to train. In the Xian Manor, they discussed and came up with a plan. They adopted the strategy of responding to changes by remaining unchanged and watching the situation develop with a smile. They wanted to use the mercenaries to guard the gate of Toulouse City for them while vigorously developing and strengthening themselves. But what they did not expect was that the mercenaries, who should be stabilizing Toulouse City and digesting the fruits of their labor, would brave the snow and come to the Xian Manor. Of course, there weren't many mercenaries. At most, there were only a few hundred of them. But among these few hundred people, there was the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. This was not a small matter. When he heard his subordinate report that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage had personally come to the city gate, Shi Wanshan, who was reading in the study, was shocked. He quickly put on his armor, called for his personal guards, and left the manor to go up the city gate tower. As he rushed up the city gate tower, Shi Wanshan was still puzzled. He could not understand why the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, who had taken down Toulouse City, did not properly digest the fruits of victory there and strengthen the city's defenses. Why did he come to the Xian Manor? What did he want to do? Shi Wanshan did not know that the so-called digestion of fruits, in the eyes of others, might be a long process, but in the eyes of Yang Chendong, who was already prepared, it was just a matter of a few words. He only needed to send the civilians who wanted to leave the city, as well as the captured Tatar soldiers, to the first city at the rear. The road from Toulouse City to the first city had already been cleared by Lu Zhua of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and the 3 new regiments, which could ensure the transportation of people and supplies. With this as a prerequisite, the distance of 700 to 800 li was not much of a problem. As for Toulouse City, 2 battalions of soldiers were left behind to maintain normal operations. It should be known that it was winter, not a good time for battle. No one would easily have any ideas about Toulouse City. Chapter 781. Yang Chendong only used 3 days to arrange all of this. Afterwards, he brought the Black Cavalry, the Wolf Fang Special Forces, and the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad to Xiangshuan City. He was preparing to celebrate the new year in Baiming's capital this year. Since he had set his goal, he wouldn't change it easily. He only brought around 200 cavalry to Xuanfu City. Yang Chendong raised his head to look at the city that had been strengthened by Shi Wanshan and loudly announced his name. The Duke of Loyalty had actually come in person, causing the soldiers guarding the city to panic. They hurriedly reported the news. Then, all of the soldiers stared at Yang Chendong, who was wearing a red robe. They were both excited and somewhat fearful. Yang Chendong wasn't an ordinary duke. He had another nickname, the God of War. Facts had also proven that this person didn't disgrace this title. Wherever he went, all of the battles he fought were always victorious. This had even spread his name. Now that such a famous person had appeared in front of their eyes, it was reasonable for the soldiers guarding the city to be curious, excited, and even a bit scared. Shi Wanshan hurriedly arrived at the city. Ancient River, Ning Wenfeng, and the others had also just arrived. Immediately, everyone climbed up the city gate tower and saw the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty, Yang Chendong. Shi Wanshan had seen Yang Chendong from afar before, so he had some impression of him. It had only been less than 2 years. With this glance, he immediately confirmed the person's identity. He immediately whispered to Ancient River, Ning Wenfeng, and the others beside him, "It is indeed the Duke of Loyalty." His identity was verified, and he couldn't see any large army ambushing him. Shi Wanshan chuckled and loudly said, "I didn't know that the Duke of Loyalty had come. I'm sorry for not going out to meet you. I've sinned. How about this, I'll immediately order people to open the city gates. Duke of Loyalty, please wait for a moment." Well said, well said. With a smile, Yang Chendong gave people a very gentle feeling. He immediately recognized the person who had shouted on the city wall. It was Shi Wanshan, the commander of the all-encompassing army. In Yangxia's security bureau, according to Yang Chendong's instructions, they not only needed detailed information about important targets and people, but also needed portraits and other evidence. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a big joke if they only knew his name and met him one day but didn't recognize him? Therefore, Yang Chendong had seen the portrait of an important figure like Shi Wanshan many times, so it was not surprising that he could recognize him immediately. The thick and heavy city gates slowly opened without making any other sound. With the cooperation of more than a dozen Baiming soldiers, the city gate was soon opened. Shi Wanshan and the others were also approaching on horseback. As he watched the city gates open, Yang Chendong smiled and quickly analyzed the situation in his mind. Then, from this small matter, he came to a conclusion. This Shi Wanshan should be ready to attack at any time, eyeing Tulu's city like a tiger eyeing its prey. Otherwise, the opening of the North City Gate would not have been so easy. One had to know that if a city gate was left untouched for a long time, it would rust. Once it was opened, it would emit creaking noises. However, there was no such sound now. It was obvious that this gate had been opened often in the past. It was self-evident what this meant. Shi Wanshan did not expect that such a small matter would lead to so many things. At this moment, he was still riding his horse with a smile on his face. When he was 5 meters away from Yang Chendong, he jumped off his horse. Then, he lowered his head and said respectfully, "Commander of the Department of Wanquan, Shi Wanshan, greets the Duke of Loyalty." Duke, Marquis, and Count. These 3 titles had very different statuses. If the other party was only a Marquis, Shi Wanshan would not have to bow like this. However, a duke was different. Yang Chendong also had the title of War God. He enjoyed a very high status in the army. It was normal for him to bow like this. When Shi Wanshan got off his horse, Ancient River, Ning Wenfeng, and the others behind him also got off their horses to greet him. Yang Chendong did not move from his horse. He just nodded and said, "Commander Shi, thank you for your hard work. Generals, thank you for your hard work." Yang Chendong's attitude made the generals unhappy. They had given him so much face. No matter what, he should have gotten off his horse and said something. Even if it was just a greeting, it should have been enough. Now, with so many generals saluting and you sitting on your horse, what would the soldiers on the city gate tower think if they saw this scene? This was the result that Yang Chendong wanted to achieve. He wanted to use this method to let the Baiming soldiers know who was the boss. Moreover, this action should not be underestimated. It would greatly increase Yang Chendong's reputation. Just like now, when the soldiers on the city gate tower looked at Yang Chendong, their gazes became much more reverent. Shi Wanshan was also a bit annoyed. With his intelligence, he naturally knew why Yang Chendong did this. However, he couldn't say anything. It was just this small matter that made him put away his pride and pay more attention to Yang Chendong. In the past, Shi Wanshan was rarely at a disadvantage, even if it was a small matter. But now, the 2 sides had just met and he had suffered losses. Not only did this not make Shi Wanshan angry, but it also made him more cautious. It had to be said that this was a character. After the 2 sides greeted each other, Shi Wanshan and the others accompanied Yang Chendong into the city. In Xianfu City, many of the citizens who lived here walked onto the streets. Many of them had heard of Yang Chendong's great name. Now that they came out, it was only because they wanted to pay their respects to him out of curiosity. With so many citizens suddenly walking on the streets, Shi Wanshan was afraid that something would happen. He immediately ordered Ancient River and the others to send out troops to maintain order. However, Yang Chendong waved his hand with a smile. "Sigh, this is the enthusiasm of the citizens. How can we disappoint them? It's fine." After saying this, Yang Chendong took the initiative to wave to the onlookers while riding on the horse. He even cupped his fist and saluted when he saw some older elders. His respect for the elders was vividly reflected, and he quickly won the favor of many people. In ancient times, many people valued filial piety. Some dynasties directly governed the world with benevolence and filial piety. Yang Chendong's current actions were in line with the national conditions of that time. It was also a way to quickly win the hearts of the citizens. After spending close to 2 hours, Yang Chendong and the others finally arrived at the commander's residence. Shi Wanshan warmly invited them to welcome the Duke of Loyalty. Along the way, Yang Chendong appeared to be greeting the citizens, but in reality, he was observing the situation in Xianfu through these matters. He noticed that the people here were in good spirits and wore thick clothes. Their living conditions should be passable. Shi Wanshan couldn't help but look at him in a higher light. No matter what, Xianfu was considered a border city. In a city like this, the appearance of the commoners should have a lot to do with this commander. Yang Chendong was curious about capable people. He naturally wouldn't reject Shi Wanshan's invitation. He smiled and nodded in agreement. Soon, the mansion became bustling with activity. Shi Wanshan knew how to conduct himself. Not only did he arrange a sumptuous banquet to invite Yang Chendong, he also warmly entertained the 200 cavalrymen he brought with him. Good wine and good meat were served. Then, he happily arranged for Song Wenfeng to represent him in receiving the guests. As he walked to the main table, he gave the other party a thoughtful look. Song Wenfeng smiled and nodded. She seemed to understand the commander's intentions and warmly greeted the 200 cavalrymen. At the main table, Yang Chendong sat at the head, followed by Shi Wanshan. Ancient River and the others accompanied them, toasting to each other. The atmosphere was very harmonious. During the banquet, Shi Wanshan constantly spoke words of admiration. For example, Yang Chendong had led the mercenaries to defeat Yeshen, won the battle to defend the capital, and raised the prestige of Baiming. He also heard that he had taken care of a few ignorant foreigners in the south and strengthened the prestige of the great Ming army. Yang Chendong only smiled and modestly declined these words. He didn't show any arrogance because of these things. Shi Wanshan saw all of this and was even more shocked. How could this young man who looked to be in his early 20s have such a calm temperament? How did he train himself to be like this? Thinking back to when he was in his early 20s, he was still suppressing his temperament in the bandits' lair. However, at that time, he was also very hot-tempered. He definitely couldn't be as indifferent as Yang Chendong. At the same time that Yang Chendong became more important, he was even more curious about the other party's sudden appearance in Xian Manor. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, he pretended to be slightly drunk and asked, "Duke, I wonder if there is something important that you have suddenly come to my Xian Manor this time?" "No." Yang Chendong still had a smile on his face as he replied. "No? Then what is the purpose of the High Duke's visit?" He pretended to be puzzled and asked. I'm just passing by. After all, I'm going to Baiming's capital, and the Xian residence is a place that I can't avoid." Yang Chendong still had a smile on his face as he replied, as if he was talking about an extremely ordinary and simple matter. But it was precisely this sentence that caused He's expression to greatly change. Even Shi Wanshan, who was at the side, had a shocked expression flash across his face. However, his reaction was very quick and he immediately returned to normal. "Duke, you're going to the capital?" He was truly shocked. Logically speaking, with Yang Chendong's current status, even if he wasn't an enemy of the Great Ming, he couldn't be considered a friendly friend either. As the saying went, a gentleman would not stand next to a collapsing wall. If he continued to stay outside, given the strength he had displayed, neither Baiming nor the southern Ming would casually fall out with him. But if he personally went to the capital, it would be like a bird flying into a cage. What would happen next would be beyond his control. Chapter 782. It was such a simple logic that anyone could see it. How could the Guild of Loyalty not understand it? Yet, he still made such a choice. What was he planning to do? Was he not afraid of death? It wasn't just Ancient River. Everyone else was also shocked. However, some people acted well and didn't show it, while others' faces betrayed everything. Yang Chendong took in everyone's expressions from the corner of his eyes. Then, he smiled and said, "I was originally a citizen of the Great Ming. Last time, I returned to my hometown to pay respects to my ancestors. I was also requested by Emperor Yingzong of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Moreover, Emperor Yingzong allowed me to go to the south. Now that my mission is complete, I naturally have to return to Baiming." Hee, I have a young village outside of Baiming's capital. There are still 2 madams there. What he said was incomparably natural and also a kind of truth. However, whether this was the truth or not, no one knew. Speaking of the young village 15 li south of the capital, there were very few people who didn't know about it. It was said that there were many people who wanted to pay their respects to it. However, it was said that the place was heavily guarded and outsiders were not allowed to enter. As for the 2 madams there, in the eyes of outsiders, they were just hostages. Now that Yang Chendong said that he was going home, naturally no one believed him. However, regardless of whether they believed it or not, since Yang Chendong said this in front of everyone, they naturally pretended to understand. The madams discussed this topic and raised their cups to drink again. What they talked about were all strange things. It was purely a topic of conversation at the table. The welcoming banquet lasted for more than 2 hours before it finally ended. Under Shi Wanshan's warm invitation, Yang Chendong and the cavalry stayed in the commander's courtyard. The residents had also cleared out the entire northern courtyard. There were dozens of rooms there and it was more than enough to accommodate these people. After Yang Chendong and the others entered the northern courtyard, they quieted down. Shi Wanshan saw that there was nothing else to tell him. He smiled and left, saying that he would come again tomorrow morning to pay his respects. Then, he returned to the eastern courtyard. Ancient River and Ning Wenfeng were already waiting there. How is it? After entering the side hall, Shi Wanshan found a seat at the head of the table and took a sip of strong tea. Then, his gaze fell on Ning Wenfeng. Earlier, he had intentionally sent this person to entertain those cavalrymen because he wanted to see if he could get any information from them. Unfortunately, Ning Wenfeng shook his head. Commander, those cavalrymen only ate. They didn't even take a sip of wine. From the beginning to the end, they didn't even say a few words. Their lips are really tight. We can't get any useful information. However, in the end, Ning Wenfeng still left something unsaid, which attracted the attention of Shi Wanshan and Ancient River. They all knew that something must have been discovered. However, through this banquet, I discovered one thing, and that is that these cavalrymen seem to be treated very well. There are some big fish and meat on the table, and most of it is fatty meat. However, I found that they only eat lean meat. I think this is because they are used to eating such things. When Ning Wenfeng talked about this, he kept shaking his head. It was obvious that he was somewhat surprised in his heart. One must know that because the ancient people's living conditions were not good, and they didn't have enough oil. Under normal circumstances, fatty meat was more desirable. Only those who were used to eating fish would choose to eat lean meat. Just this alone was enough to explain a lot of problems. Shi Wanshan couldn't help but nod his head. The scouts have also reported that the meals and treatment of the mercenaries have always been very good. This confirms the authenticity of this matter. Ancient River, who was sitting there, saw that the 2 of them were talking about food. He couldn't help but say anxiously, "Hey, now is the time. Why do we still care about those things? In my opinion, we should immediately send a large number of troops to surround the northern courtyard and capture the Duke of Loyalty. Then, we can hand him over to the imperial court. That would be a great merit." No. When Ancient River finished speaking, Ning Wenfeng hurriedly shook his head to stop him. Originally, Shi Wanshan also wanted to object. However, when he heard Ning Wenfeng speak first, he didn't rush to express his opinion. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Wenfeng, why not?" "Commander, the Duke of Loyalty is not easy to deal with, especially the mercenaries under him. Even the Emperor is very wary of them. Right now, we haven't figured out the intentions of the higher-ups, so we can't just make a decision. What's more, if we touch the Duke of Loyalty, the mercenaries will definitely take action. Once they're angered, they'll launch an all-out attack on us. Not to mention whether our Xian manor will be able to hold on. Will the higher-ups hand us over to stabilize the situation?" Ning Wenfeng's thoughts were so far-sighted that Shi Wanshan nodded his head repeatedly. At the same time, Ancient River's face was filled with shock. Yes. If we make a move now, the imperial court might be happy for a while, but once the mercenaries make a fuss, the higher-ups will probably push us out as scapegoats. We can't do something like that. Ah, if only eunuch Deng was here. The eunuch Deng that ancient river spoke of was the eunuch guardian of the Xian manor, Deng Chang. A while ago, the emperor wanted to know the situation here and summoned him back to the capital for questioning. When it came to eunuch Deng, Ning Wenfeng had a different opinion. It's actually a good thing that eunuch Deng isn't here. Otherwise, if he wanted us to capture the Duke of Loyalty, what do you think we should do? Disobeying his orders is the same as disobeying the emperor's decree. Which one of us can bear the consequences? And if something happens in the future, he can send us back at any time, but the rest of us will have to suffer. Ancient River's face paled at this reminder, and he inwardly sighed. As expected, he couldn't think as well as Ning Wenfeng, so he modestly asked, then what should we do next? Based on what you've said, the Duke of Loyalty is a hot potato that will bring misfortune to whoever takes him over. That's about right. Since we now know what sort of status he has, it's better to immediately send him out of Xian City. As for whether he wants to return to Tulu or go to the capital, that's his choice, Ning Wenfeng chuckled, clearly agreeing with Ancient River's analogy. Send him away now? Isn't that a little too hasty? This time, it was Shi Wanshan who spoke. It was clear that he was somewhat unwilling to part with such a fat piece of meat being delivered to him. He felt that if he didn't do anything, he would be letting down this opportunity that had been thrown at him. Ning Wenfeng could understand what Shi Wanshan was thinking. After all, this was an opportunity. Alas, this bait was too big, so big that they simply couldn't swallow it. If they forcefully swallowed it, it would be delightful for a moment, but soon, their stomachs would burst open. Therefore, when he saw that Shi Wanshan was still hesitating, he had no choice but to say, Commander, this matter can't be delayed. Once eunuch Deng finds out about this and sends someone to pass down the order for us to take action, I'm afraid we won't have any other choice. This reminder caused Shi Wanshan's expression to change. That's right. We should send them away quickly. Seeing that Shi Wanshan had listened to his suggestion, Ning Wenfeng added, yes, we'll send them away tomorrow morning and then send someone to inform eunuch Deng in the capital that we don't dare to act on our own. Moreover, the Duke of Loyalty is certain to be in a hurry to leave, so we can't stop him. Thus, we'll leave the matter up to them. Logically speaking, with Shi Wanshan's intelligence, it wasn't that he hadn't thought of these things. It was just that the implications of this matter were too great, and for a moment, he was a little fascinated and couldn't extricate himself. Now that he heard this, he immediately made the right choice. Okay, I'll persuade the Duke of Loyalty to leave tomorrow morning. The East Courtyard was still secretly plotting and thinking of a way to deal with this. In the North Courtyard, Beta Persei also came to Yang Chendong's side and asked for instructions. There was another person standing at the side. He was thin, and who else could it be but Shile? Tiger's Mane didn't return to the capital with Yang Chendong this time, but stayed in the first city area. The sixth young master wasn't here, and the military here also needed a strong person to hold the fort. Tiger's Mane, who had just become a division commander, obviously had such qualifications. Tiger's Mane wasn't here, but he had asked Shile to accompany him. It was obvious that Yang Chendong really thought highly of this person's ability. Shile's speech about the people deeply won Yang Chendong's heart. In order to get to know this person better, and also to give him some pointers, Yang Chendong kept him by his side. This action naturally caused Shi Biao to be extremely excited. Shile's mother was Han, and he originally had some Han appearance. Now that he had changed into the Black Knight's clothes, no one could tell that he was originally the Deputy General of Tulu City. And just now, Yang Chendong was talking to him about the current situation. Beta Persei entered the room, first glanced at Shile, nodded as a greeting, and then turned to Yang Chendong and asked, Young Master, the captains asked if we should be fully armed tonight and be ready to fight at any time. No need. Yang Chendong waved his hand and said decisively. Then what if this Shi Wanshan has other ideas? If we aren't prepared at all, I'm afraid that we won't be able to guarantee our safety. Beta Persei added anxiously. Usually, when he was by Yang Chendong's side, he was very obedient. Usually, when Yang Chendong said one, he wouldn't say two. But now the situation was different. They were in someone else's lair, and it was related to the sixth young master's safety, so he had to say more. He also knew that Beta Persei would ask this because he was worried about his safety. Yang Chendong didn't mean to blame him, but said indifferently, if they really want to fight, do you really think that we can stop their army with just 200 riders? Okay, tell the soldiers to have a good rest today, we still have to travel tomorrow. Chapter 783. Since Yang Chendong had said so, Beta Persei could only nod and say, yes, I will arrange it now. After Beta Persei left the room, Yang Chendong glanced at Shibi and said, continue what you were saying. Yes. Shibi replied respectfully, before continuing with the previous topic, we know a little about Shi Wanshan, he's a smart man. It is because of his intelligence that we will be safer. Unfortunately, the eunuch Deng Chang is not here, so no one can force him to do anything. So as long as he is not crazy, he will definitely not do anything to us. Shibi was indeed very capable. Her analysis was actually consistent with the East Courtyard's view. Yang Chendong nodded in agreement and said, you just said that we can leave the city tomorrow morning. How can you be so sure? Replying to the sixth young master, I will say the same thing. Eunuch Deng Chang is not here, so this is Shi Wanshan's opportunity. Otherwise, once the news spreads, Deng Chang might react and send someone to give instructions. I am afraid that the development of the matter will not be up to Shi Wanshan to decide. Shibi was very mindful of his identity. Although he boasted of being smart, in front of Yang Chendong, he would only say what was asked and would not show off. This was because Yang Chendong was a smarter person than he was. After hearing this, Yang Chendong valued Shibi's ability even more. This was exactly the same as the result of his analysis. This was also the reason why he dared to appear in the Xian mansion with only 200 cavalry. His life was indeed valuable, but at the same time, it was also dangerous. Unless Northern Ming was prepared to shed all pretense of cordiality with the mercenaries, at least on the surface, they wouldn't dare to make a move on him. This gave him a chance to move freely. Well, you must be tired from the journey. Go and have a good rest. I have arranged for people to prepare ginseng soup for you. Remember to drink it when you go back. It is good for your body to recover quickly. Looking at the thin Shibi, Yang Chendong said with concern. Thank you, sixth young master. She was very excited, and her face was also very touched. The other party's importance and concern in his life made him feel like he was willing to die for someone who knew him well. In his heart, he had already recognized this master and would not change in this life. Just like that, the night passed peacefully, and nothing happened. When the sun rose the next morning, Shi Wanshan, with his eyes still bloodshot, appeared outside the northern courtyard. He wanted to see Yang Chendong. Shi Wanshan had already heard from the people in the mansion that the Duke and the 200 cavalry had rested well last night. They had only arranged for 2 soldiers to guard the gate of the northern courtyard and did not do anything else. When he heard this report, Shi Wanshan couldn't help but sigh. This Duke of Loyalty's breadth of mind and his ability to see things clearly was not something ordinary people could compare to. Even he himself, although he had seen through everything, because he still wanted to ask for more, he did not rest well last night. His eyes were still bloodshot. His request was approved. When he saw Yang Chendong, he found him practicing martial arts in the courtyard. He looked very energetic. In the snow, Lin Chendong's martial arts caused the snowflakes to float in the air. It gave people a very majestic feeling. The only regret was that Shi Wanshan could not see the origin and style of this set of martial arts. After practicing a set of military martial arts 3 times in a row, Yang Chendong took a hot towel from Beta Persei. After wiping his face, he looked at Shi Wanshan who was standing there and said, Commander Shi, good morning. Good morning, Duke. With a smile on his face, Shi Wanshan said with a smile. Yang Qindong immediately noticed the bloodshot eyes of Shi Wanshan, but he did not say anything. On the contrary, he could understand the other party. If he was in his position, he would not be able to sleep well tonight. After the two sides greeted each other, Shi Wanshan politely invited the duke to have breakfast together. Logically speaking, Yang Qindong was just a duke, so the other party did not need to be so polite. But because he had something to say, he became the one asking for a favor. Yang Qindong, who was well aware of this, immediately smiled and agreed. After all, he also needed a way out. Otherwise, if he really angered the other party and really made a move, the other party would not have a good ending, but he was afraid that he would not be any better. One had feelings, the other had intentions. The two sat at the dining table. Then, when breakfast was almost finished, Shi Wanshan finally brought up the topic of leaving. Duke, I have some capable people under me. They have some insights into the changes in the weather. According to them, there will be heavy snow in 2 days, which is very inconvenient for traveling. Instead of directly asking Yang Qindong to leave, he found such an excuse. It could be seen that Shi Wanshan also used his brain. Yang Qindong naturally knew the other party's intentions. This happened to coincide with his analysis of the other party yesterday. But at this moment, he still pretended to be very surprised and said, "Is there such a thing? It seems that my plan needs to change. I originally wanted to stay in Xuanqing Prefecture for a few days to enjoy the scenery here, but it seems that I have to leave immediately." Seeing that Yang Qindong had accepted his good intentions, Shi Wanshan was naturally overjoyed, but on the surface, he still pretended to urge him to stay and said, "Why don't you wait until after the snowstorm and then go to the capital?" "Oh. That's not a bad idea." Seeing Shi Wanshan's hypocritical look, Yang Qindong's interest was piqued and he teased him. As expected, Shi Wanshan's expression changed as soon as he said this. But he had just opened his mouth to urge him to stay, so how could he slap his own mouth? He could only look bitterly at Yang Qindong. Chuckling, Yang Qindong changed the topic. "This duke appreciates Commander Wan's good intentions, but I haven't seen my wife for nearly 2 years and miss her very much. I'd better leave first." "Oh right, since there's a snowstorm, I'm afraid that my cavalry and I will encounter it at any time. For the sake of safety, I'd like to ask Commander Wan to make things convenient and prepare more food for them, such as jerky and wine. The more, the better." Since the other party had asked him to leave, Yang Qindong naturally wanted to take the opportunity to ask for some benefits. Although these things weren't worth much and were only enough for 200 people, it was still enough to disgust the other party. Although the request wasn't high, Shi Wanshan felt a little sick in his heart. Why was it that when his opponent came, not only could he not do anything to him, he had to take out some things to give him as a gift? At this moment, he really wanted to shout angrily that there was nothing he wanted, and if he didn't leave now, he would be caught. But in the end, this was just a thought, and he forcefully suppressed it. "Well said, well said. I'll immediately have someone make the arrangements." Shi Wanshan agreed. Yang Qindong was all smiles, but he was extremely vigilant. If the other party was seething with anger, not only would he not be afraid, he would even understand. But a person who could suppress his true thoughts was the scariest. To avoid any unexpected problems, Yang Qindong had his own goal. After receiving the food from Shi Wanshan and the clearance documents, he left Xuanqing with 200 black cavalry and left the Wanquan Metropolitan Division, heading straight for Huilai City. While Yang Qindong's group was on their way to Baiming's capital, an urgent memorial was being delivered to Baiming's capital. The one who had written this memorial was the commander of the Wanquan Metropolitan Division, Shi Wanshan. Since Yang Qindong had appeared in his territory, he naturally had to report this matter to his superiors as soon as possible. After passing through Huilai, entering the Great Wall, exiting Jiyong Pass, Baiming's capital was finally within sight. It had been nearly 2 years since they had parted, and when he thought about his 2 wives, Yang Qindong felt all sorts of emotions well up in his heart. In terms of time, it hadn't even been 2 years since he had left the capital to pay respects to his ancestors, but he had truly accomplished many things. He had defeated the Huang bandits, wiped out the Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms, and now built a large city on the steppe. This seemed like an impossible task that would have taken many years, but he had accomplished it in a short period of time. Just this achievement alone was enough to leave his name in the annals of history. Even if he were to return home and become a wealthy man or a duke, he would still be able to live a carefree life. But when he thought about how there were still so many Han commoners wandering outside and being bullied by others, and how his descendants would be harassed by foreign tribes, their families destroyed, and they would be reduced to slaves and humiliated, Yang Chendong's heart madly thumped. Since he had come here by chance, he had to do some things. Otherwise, wouldn't he be letting down the heavens? At the very least, I've laid down the foundation. As long as I continue to develop normally, everything will be fine. Everything will change. Encouraging himself, Yang Chendong rode on his white dragon horse and raised its whip, increasing its speed toward Baiming's capital. Baiming's capital. It was still as bustling as ever. Crowds flowed through the streets, and the sounds of hawking could be heard. It was as lively and prosperous as the along the river during the Qingming festival. In contrast, the imperial palace of the capital was in chaos. Several junior eunuchs from the Bureau of Rites had hurriedly led their teams out of the palace to inform the important officials to discuss matters with the emperor. The main reason for this was the urgent report that Shi Wanshan had delivered. Emperor Zhu Qiyu had never imagined that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage who had given him such a headache and left him helpless would suddenly appear in the Xuanfu residence. Looking at the report from the commander of the Myriad Affairs Bureau, Shi Wanshan, he realized that this person's goal was the capital of Baiming. When Jin Ying, the head eunuch, hurriedly delivered the memorial to the throne to him, Zhu Qizhen was really startled. He almost jumped up from the dragon throne and cried out in alarm. Chapter 784. Regarding what Yang Chendong had done with the mercenaries in the north, there were naturally regular reports from the spies of the military's brocade guard, which had also provoked Zhu Qiyu's anger and delight. He was angry because of the actions of the mercenaries in the new, gone capital region. After 3 battles, Baiming's northern guard had lost nearly 20,000 soldiers. He was happy because Yang Chendong's appearance had greatly reduced the military pressure on Baiming in the north. According to the Datong Prefecture's report, even Walla Yeshan's troops that had already occupied the Hetao region had stopped their attacks because of the establishment of the first city and the appearance of the mercenaries. From this, one could see the prestige of Yang Chendong. It was a pity that this person could not only be used by him. If he could, it would not be difficult to defeat the Southern Ming Empire and unify the world. Zhu Qiyu touched his forehead as if he had a headache. This small action was seen by Jin Ying, who was standing at the side and serving him. He hurriedly asked with concern, "Your Majesty, are you feeling unwell?" "No." "Inform them. The officials should be here soon, right?" Zhu Qiyu shook his head. He thought about why the officials had not arrived yet and asked a few more questions. "I've already informed them. They should be here soon," Jin Ying hurriedly replied. Then, he raised his foot and looked outside the hall. Although he could not see anything by doing this, he wanted to use this action to tell the emperor that he was also very anxious. They did not have to wait for long. Soon, a flurry of footsteps sounded outside the hall. Then, the voice of a eunuch was heard. "Your Majesty, Minister of War Yi Ming has arrived. He requests an audience." "Your Majesty, Minister of Justice Su Yozhen has arrived. He requests an audience." All right. Call them all in." Jin Ying had been looking at Zhu Qiyu from the corner of his eyes. Although he did not say anything, his face was already filled with impatience. Thus, he acted on his own initiative and shouted loudly outside. In a short while, the Minister of Personnel Wang Ji, the Minister of Revenue Jin Lian, the Minister of Rights Hu Chang, the Minister of War Yi Ming, the Minister of Justice Su Yozhen, the Minister of Work Shi Pu, and the Imperial Censor of the Left Chen Yi entered the Imperial Palace and stood in line. In less than 2 years, there were not many changes in Zhu Qiyu's regime. In reality, Baiming didn't seem to have any major issues, and its internal affairs were stable and united. But in reality, it was nothing more than a golden exterior. Zhu Qiyu's ascension to the throne was, after all, a special case. It wasn't a normal ascension to the throne, which caused many people to criticize him. In fact, it had already been 3 years since the defeat of Tumu, but there were still people mentioning that matter. The general idea was that since Yingzong was fine, he should have come back to be the emperor instead of going to the Southern Ming Empire to be the Southern Emperor. As a result, the powerful Great Ming Empire was split into 2 halves, and its strength was greatly reduced. There were still people who were doubtful about the position below his butt. For this reason, the Genie Guards and the Eastern Palace Guards contributed a lot and arrested a lot of people. On the surface, it seemed to be calm. But once a crisis was discovered, no one could be sure that no one would come out to make trouble. The military had been training new recruits and refining firearms, which were very expensive things. For a time, it caused the Baiming regime to be unable to make ends meet, so that many officials' salaries couldn't be paid in time, which caused many people to complain. External affairs. Needless to say, the Southern Ming Empire seemed to be harmonious, but who knew what kind of thoughts Zhu Qizhen had for his brother who stole the throne? They didn't use it now because of the rampant foreign invasion. But once there was no foreign invasion, there would be a big war to determine the winner. Not to mention, because of the problems in the joint business, the kingdom of Wara was no longer as friendly as before. The other side had even sent troops to occupy the Hetao region, which made the western region restless. At this time, mercenaries came from the northwest, which made the situation more complicated. With all kinds of situations added together, Zhu Qiyu often felt a headache coming on. In such an environment, the ministers naturally didn't move if they could. Otherwise, it would only cause panic and other complicated situations to arise. 6 ministers and a censor of the left were standing in the main hall. They were all puzzled. They couldn't figure out why the emperor was in such a hurry to summon them. It seemed that they had just started the court meeting this morning. At that time, the emperor didn't say anything and just waited for them to return home. Their buttocks hadn't even warmed up from their seats yet, and now they were urgently summoned. Could it be that something urgent had happened? Thinking of this, the expressions of the 7 ministers changed. The first thing they thought of was that the Walla had attacked. Perhaps this was the only thing that could make the emperor so uneasy. Thinking about it, didn't Yingzong lose to Yeshen? As for why no one thought about the Southern Ming Empire and the mercenaries, it was because in a sense, they were on the same side. Now that the external threat had not been dealt with, there shouldn't be any internal problems. The expressions of the 7 ministers changed one after another, but they were all calm. No one said anything, waiting for the emperor's orders. Zhu Qiyu had long been used to this scene. He also knew that these ministers were all scheming people. Normal things wouldn't be able to provoke them. Good, since it was like this, he would make a move today to provoke them. Jining, let the ministers have a look at the memorial. Yes, Your Majesty. Jining agreed. Holding the memorial that Shi Wanshan had sent, she was the first to walk in front of the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji. Minister Wang, please have a look. Since ancient times, the officials of the Ministry of Personnel were one level higher than the officials. They were also known as the heavenly official of the Ministry of Personnel. Thus, it was never wrong to let Wang Ji have a look first. Wang Ji nodded his head reservedly. Then, he took the memorial and began to read it. But in just a few breaths, his expression kept changing. It was obvious that this memorial must be about something important. Otherwise, the heavenly official of the Ministry of Revenue, who usually didn't show his joy on his face, wouldn't be so nervous and lose his composure. After about 10 breaths, Wang Ji returned the memorial to Great Eunuch Jining. Then, the memorial was passed down to the Minister of Revenue, Jin Lian. His expression also changed, no different from Wang Ji's earlier expression. After another 10 breaths, the memorial continued to be passed down, and the same thing happened again and again. Zhu Qiyu sat high on the golden dragon throne, carefully observing the changing expressions on the ministers' faces. Every time he saw a minister about to lose his composure, he felt extremely proud. How is it? I must have scared all of you this time. Otherwise, when I lose my composure, you would always lecture me to calm down. Now, look at all of you. How are you going to calm down? In a little more than 10 minutes, the 7 ministers had all read the memorial. Jining returned to Zhu Qiyu's side and stood at the side. The Emperor of Dai Zong's voice resounded through the hall. Everyone has seen the news, yes? Tell me what you think. The hall was silent. No one immediately responded to the Emperor's question, as if they were still digesting the news they had just received. When Zhu Qiyu impatiently asked again, the Minister of Justice, Su Yozhen, finally stood up and said, Your Majesty, may this subject be so bold as to ask, is this news true? Could it be someone pretending to be the Duke of Loyalty and Courage? It was no wonder that Su Yozhen would ask such a question. Yang Qindong was no longer the same as before. In the battle to defend the capital after Tumu's defeat, Yang Qindong had stepped forward and led the so-called mercenaries to defeat the menacing Yeshan's Wara army. At the time, he had a reason to say that this army didn't belong to him because he had saved someone, and that person just so happened to be the leader of the mercenaries. Now, it seemed that this was just a story. All kinds of evidence had already shown that the so-called leader of the mercenaries was none other than Yang Qindong himself. This had long been reported from the southern Ming Empire, and according to the investigations of the Baiming Brocade Guard and the East Faction Guards, the mercenaries were very powerful and should have an overseas base. It was only because most of the great Ming Empire's ships were in the southern Ming Empire that they couldn't investigate. But in any case, it was more or less confirmed that Yang Qindong was the leader of the mercenaries. Then why did Yang Qindong appear in Baiming's capital at this time? Didn't he know that this method was no different from entering the tiger's den? This was tantamount to delivering oneself to be slaughtered. Su Yozhen was the first to be chosen by Yang Qindong and spent a lot of effort to support him to become a minister. He really couldn't understand the meaning behind Yang Qindong's actions, which was why he asked this question. Most importantly, he didn't receive any information in advance this time. He was a spy. Su Yozhen couldn't figure it out and couldn't understand it. He wasn't the only one. The other ministers also had the same thought. At least in their view, if they were in the same situation, they would never appear in Baiming's capital. If they had to appear, they would have to bring an army. Only when the soldiers were at the city gates would they have the power to deter others. Finally, someone spoke. Zhu Qiyu nodded in satisfaction and said to Su Yozhen, Minister Su, Commander Shi has seen the Duke of Loyalty before. Since he has submitted a memorial, he wouldn't joke about such a matter. It seems that it is the Duke of Loyalty. Since the Emperor had said so, even if Su Yozhen had doubts, he couldn't say anything about this matter. He could only nod and return to his seat. If the person who came was really the Duke of Loyalty, then he needed to think about what to do next. There was no need for him to immediately express his opinion. Su Yozhen retreated. Minister of War Yi Ming-Kai stepped out from his seat and said, Your Majesty, if the person who came is really the Duke of Loyalty, this subject requests that you interrogate him properly. At the same time, have him hand over the command of the mercenaries to my Baiming. If this happens, my Baiming's military strength will greatly increase. At that time, whatever Walla or Yes Hen, they will no longer be our opponents. Not only that, we also have a high chance of recovering the southern Ming Empire and unifying the world. Chapter 785. Yi Ming's voice became louder and louder, and he became more and more excited. When he reached the end of his sentence, his face was flushed red. Evidently, he was excited because of this result. Zhu Qiyu was also excited, and his face was also flushed red. This was the reason why he called the ministers over. He already had such an idea. Since he knew that Yang Qindong was the leader of the mercenaries, how could he not grab hold of him when he was sent to him? Good, good. In his excitement, Zhu Qiyu couldn't help but nod. However, the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, spoke up, Your Majesty, you can't do that. Zhu Qiyu, who was in a good mood, immediately became unhappy when he heard this. When he saw that the person who spoke was Wang Ji, he couldn't help but snort coldly. The dissatisfaction on his face was completely displayed. Wang Ji's grandson, Wang Si, had once been on good terms with Yang Qindong, and had even been part of the first batch of students at the Yang Family Academy. Not only that, but after Yang Qindong left Baiming, everything related to the Yang Family Academy had been taken care of by him. It could be said that he was a true student of Yang Xia, and also a staunch supporter of Yang Qindong. Because of this matter, Wang Ji had been accused by many people in the past 2 years. Some said that he was colluding with a foreign country, some said that he was betraying his master for glory, and some even said that he was Yang Qindong's dog, waiting to bite at any time. In the face of these accusations, Wang Ji had never defended himself. He just did his job obediently. He admired Yang Qindong, but he had never worked together with him. Recently, he hadn't contacted him at all. As the saying goes, if you don't do anything wrong, you don't have to be afraid of ghosts calling at your door. With this kind of mentality, Wang Ji still did things his own way. Daizong Zhu Qiyu was also dissatisfied with him, but because Wang Ji's ability was outstanding, under his coordination, the promotion of officials were carried out in an orderly manner, so he rarely had to worry about it. At this time, if it was another person, there might not be such good results. Not to mention, after being the Minister of Personnel for so many years, he had disciples all over the world. If he wanted to target Wang Ji, it would be impossible without a clear plan. It would only lead to chaos, and that was not what Zhu Qiyu wanted to see. However, not moving Wang Ji did not mean that Zhu Qiyu liked him. Seeing this person jump out so quickly at this time, of course he was unhappy in his heart. He only snorted coldly and did not reprimand him. This was already giving him a lot of face. Zhu Qiyu's face was filled with displeasure. Wang Ji was not moved by this. Everything he did was for the good of Baiming. He did not care about anything else. Even if he spoke now, it was for the good of Baiming. Your Majesty, you must not act rashly. The Duke of Loyalty has not committed any great crime. If we act rashly, what excuse can we use to control him? Moreover, if we act against the Duke of Loyalty, what will the mercenaries do? Will they attack us, Baiming? Although we have more than half of the new recruits, their fighting strength is not fully formed. If we fight with the mercenaries now, it is difficult to determine the outcome. If we do this, we will only let others benefit from it, Your Majesty. There was no need for Wang Ji to explain the strength of the mercenaries. Who in the room did not know? If their fighting strength was too weak, how could they defeat Walla and force Yeshen to retreat? How could they defeat the Huang bandit army that gave the Southern Ming Empire a headache so easily? How could they destroy Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms so easily? Now, they had come to the northwest of Baiming. It was said that they had built a large city there and defeated Agadalji and Mabe Mongols, killing and capturing 70,000 cavalry. At the very least, this was not a result that Baiming's new recruits could achieve. Against this kind of enemy, everything had to be done carefully. Otherwise, the slightest carelessness would bring about a disaster. With such thoughts and concerns, Wang Ji immediately stood up. As soon as he said this, the other officials hesitated. The other ministers who wanted to speak also completely shut their mouths at this time. With their abilities, they naturally understood that Wang Ji's words were correct. If they killed the Duke of Loyalty, they would anger the mercenaries. The consequences of that would be unbearable for Baiming. At that time, Baiming would be destroyed and the Southern Ming Empire would unify the world. For these officials who were used to considering the gains and losses before doing anything, when they knew that using methods against Yang Qindong would bring about unknown consequences, they could not help but remain silent and suppress the excitement in their hearts. After Wang Ji made his stance clear, the other officials did not speak. It was as if they were shocked by the situation in front of them and needed time to think before making a final decision. Zhu Qiyu looked at the situation in front of him and knew that it was impossible for him to get a result. He could only say, in that case, we will give you 3 days. After 3 days, everyone can write their thoughts into memorials for us to preview. For now, you can all leave. There was no coercion. It seemed that Zhu Qiyu also needed time to think about this before making a final decision. Fortunately, the memorials were sent at the speed of 800 li. It was unknown how much faster it was than Yang Chendong's 200 cavalry. They still had time to prepare. The 7 officials knelt on the ground and said, "Long live the emperor," before getting up and leaving. However, it could be seen that each of their faces was incomparably heavy, as if they had something on their minds. Wang Zhi's residence. Not long after the minister returned, his grandson Wang Si walked into the main hall. "Grandfather, you have something urgent to talk to me about?" On the way back, Wang Zhi had arranged for people to go to Yang village to inform his most valued grandson. Seeing that his grandson had rushed back so quickly, Wang Zhi's face could not help but reveal a trace of gratification. Wang Zhi had been the Minister of Personnel for many years. He could be considered an old official and had worked with the 3 Yangs before. It could be said that he had seen the ups and downs of aristocratic families. In the end, he learned something. If an aristocratic family wanted to continue to exist, it was useless to rely on a temporary imperial favor. Did you not see the glory of the 3 Yangs? But now? How many of their descendants would mention it? Of course, Yang Rong's youngest son, Yang Chendong, was an exception. Even until now, Wang Zhi still couldn't figure out how this person made his fortune. How did he manage to create such a powerful mercenary army? A temporary imperial favor was not enough. If he wanted the family to continue to prosper, he needed more talents. As long as he had the ability, with the help of the family, there would be a day when he would rise to the top. That was the way to continue to prosper. As such, Wang Zhi had always placed great importance on the nurturing of the family's descendants. Wang Si was the most outstanding person in the 3rd generation. Based on Wang Zhi's plan, this grandson would first train in some of the smaller departments. Once he had enough experience, it was inevitable that he would be entrusted with important tasks. But he never thought that the most valued grandson would be interested in Yang Chendong's Yang Shui and couldn't get out of it. He even threw his previous official position aside, using the excuse that he was not feeling well. He only focused on learning Yang Shui in Yang village and became a teacher. It was originally a good thing for his descendants to study and study. Once one's knowledge reached a certain level, one would be able to understand the world. Thus, one would not have to worry about not having a good future. However, Wang Si was learning Yang Shui, so everything was different. Even now, there were still many scholars in the capital who criticized Yang Shui. They felt that this was not the path of a saint, but an unorthodox path. It was a perverted technique that could not be used in the public. Regarding this, Wang Zhi had always been hesitant. There was even a period of time when he wanted to intervene and have his beloved grandson leave the Yang family academy and return as an official. However, it was at this moment that news of Yang Chendong leading the mercenaries to victory spread. Even the faraway Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms were annihilated just like that. Upon entering the capital with such results, Wang Zhi immediately cut off his previous thoughts. He decided to take a look. Perhaps his beloved grandson Wang Si had made the right choice. It was because of Wang Zhi's hesitation that Wang Si was able to become the temporary principal of the Yang family manor for the past 2 years. He was not affected by the outside world. However, he did not know that the real principal was about to return. It was destined that the Yang family manor and Yang family academy, which were gradually being forgotten by others, would be valued once more. To his closest relative, to his favorite grandson, Wang Zhi did not beat around the bush. Sit down first. Listen to your grandfather tell you something. Seeing his grandfather's grave expression, Wang Si nodded and found the nearest chair to sit down. He looked at Wang Si in confusion, and then he quickly jumped up from the chair. Grandfather, what did you say? The Duke of Loyalty has already passed the Xian residence and is heading to the capital? It was no wonder that Wang Si was so excited. Although he was a teacher in the Yang family academy, he had a deep understanding of everything related to Yang Chendong. This was naturally due to the fact that his grandfather frequently sent people to inform him of the news, but more importantly, his actions had already gained the approval and trust of the two madams of the Yang family manor, so when there was any news, he would naturally know about it very quickly. And every time he received a piece of news, Wang Si would be excited for several days. This was especially so when he learned that Yang Chendong had led the mercenaries to destroy the two small kingdoms of Jiaoji and Lansang. He had even thought of leaving the capital and looking for Yang Chendong. After all, Wang Si was still a young man, only in his 20s. Impulsiveness and restlessness were still in their nature. The thought of leading an army to kill enemies on the battlefield made him excited. He only hoped that one day, Yang Chendong would remember him and summon him to his side. He had been preparing for this all this time. Chapter 786. But to his surprise, this idea was about to come true. Yang Chendong was actually heading straight for the capital. He wanted to see his teacher. Perhaps in the future, he would be able to follow by his side and gallop on the battlefield? Grandfather, how many soldiers did the Duke of Loyalty bring with him this time? Excited, Wang Si looked at Wang Ji expectantly. According to the report, there were only 200 cavalrymen following him, Wang Ji replied without hiding anything. Only 200 cavalrymen? Wang Si couldn't help but frown and ask, did the emperor summon him back? No, the emperor didn't have such thoughts, nor did he issue such a decree. It was all done by the Duke of Loyalty himself, Wang Ji replied with a satisfied look in his eyes. Just from these two questions, it could be seen that his grandson was indeed a meticulous person and considered things very comprehensively. Wang Si didn't look at his grandfather's attitude towards him and instead lowered his head. After a while, he suddenly raised his head and said, in that case, the Duke of Loyalty is in danger. His grandson finally thought of this. Wang Ji chuckled, that's right. That's not right. Unexpectedly, Wang Si quickly shook his head, there shouldn't be any great danger. If we can see it, the Duke of Loyalty will definitely be able to see it as well. But he still only brought 200 cavalrymen to the capital. This means that he should have something to rely on. It's just that I haven't thought of it yet. As expected of Wang Ji's beloved grandson and someone that Yang Chendong had taken a liking to. To be able to think of this matter so quickly, just in terms of intelligence, he wasn't much different from some of the important officials. As long as he got rid of the impatience in his heart, given enough time, he would definitely become a great person. Wang Ji was very satisfied, but at the same time, he was thinking of another problem. Since his grandson was so promising, as his grandfather, he had to ensure his safety. Return to the Yang family manor in a while and stay there. Before the Duke of Loyalty returns, you must not leave the manor. Do you understand? Grandson understands. Many thanks for grandfather's concern. Although there were still many things that Wang Si didn't understand, he still prepared to ask questions. But he also knew that his grandfather was saying all this for his own safety. Perhaps with Yang Chendong's current strength and influence, the emperor would not dare to do anything to him, but he could still deal with some of the people around the Yang clan. Unfortunately, he was one of them. After that, Wang Si asked a lot of questions. Regarding this, Wang Ji answered every question and explained everything clearly. From time to time, one could see Wang Si nodding or looking relieved. He finally knew what Yang Chendong was relying on. The powerful mercenaries were his backing. Even the Daizong emperor didn't dare to act rashly. Perhaps this was what he was relying on. At the same time, in the Hu mansion, Hu Shao summoned his eldest son, Hu Changning, to his study. Father and son met in a secret room. He told his father the reason for the emperor's urgent summons. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is back. It's a bit dangerous to only bring 200 cavalrymen. Hu Changning was also a smart person. While he was surprised, he also pointed out the key point of the matter. It is a bit dangerous, but it's not important. Hu Shao, who had known the news long ago, had thought of many things on his way back from the palace. Now that he said it was not important, it was clear that he had thought through some key issues. It was still the same question. Why did Yang Chendong only bring 200 cavalrymen back to the capital of Baiming? Could it be that he was stupid or crazy? Or was he so arrogant that he thought that no one would dare to touch him? To be able to control such a powerful force at the age of 23, destroy 2 small countries in succession, and even build a large city on the plains where the situation was complicated and chaotic, it was clear that he wanted to compete with the Mongolian cavalry. How could such a person not think carefully before doing anything? How could such a person make a decision that was child's play? After thinking this through, Hu Chang naturally relaxed a lot. He thought about everything that had happened in the court. Minister Wang Ji had only said a few words to suppress Yi Ming, and also forced the emperor to make a decision carefully. This already proved that Yang Chendong's safety was not a big problem. Of course, this did not prevent people from taking the risk to suddenly kill Yang Chendong. But if someone really did that, it would be the same as putting Baiming on the fire. This was not something that Dai Zong wanted to see. In order to avoid such a problem, he would even take the initiative to send people to protect Yang Chendong. As for calling his son over today, other than the necessary notification, he also had something to ask. Changning, you are still working in the embroidered uniform guard. You can see if there are any sudden changes. If there are, you must pay attention. Father, are you saying that someone will do something in desperation? No matter what, Hu Changning had been in the court for more than 10 years. He naturally understood his father's words. It's very possible. Hu Shao said with a solemn expression. There are some things that the emperor might not do, but it doesn't mean that the people below won't do it. You have to know that there are always some people who think that they are smart and can guess the emperor's intentions. And these conceited people are often the ones who ruin things. Not everyone in the world is as smart as Shi Wanshan. Clearly, Hu Zhao's words meant that he had seen through Shi Wanshan's thoughts. Logically speaking, this person was the first to come into contact with Yang Chendong, and he was the most likely person to solve the problem. For example, he could directly send troops to capture Yang Chendong, or even kill him, and send his head to the capital. If he did that, Dai Zong would definitely be very happy. But this way, Shi Wanshan would be in danger. How could the mercenaries let him go? It was even possible that in order to appease the anger of the mercenaries, Dai Zong would personally give the order to punish Shi Wanshan. If that was really the case, it would be the same as jumping into the Yellow River, and he would never be able to wash away his guilt. Shi Wanshan wouldn't be able to see these things, which was why he let Yang Chendong enter the pass. Then, he would send him back 800 li in an urgent manner, and this matter would have nothing to do with him anymore. This method of transferring responsibility was played beautifully, and it would also solve his own safety, but it would also incur Dai Zong's displeasure. Of course, preserving his life was more important. As for whether Dai Zong would be happy or what kind of methods he would use in the future, Hu Shao didn't bother to guess. This matter had nothing to do with him, so why should he think about it? At this moment, it was better to find out more about the embroidered uniform guard. If someone wanted to act rashly, he would be prepared. Yes, father, this child understands. Hu Changning understood his father's meaning and immediately expressed his attitude. Although the embroidered uniform guard had always been independent when it came to handling matters, and everyone usually carried out their own duties without interfering with each other, his so-called asking about the situation wouldn't yield any results. However, there were some things that couldn't be done without results. After all, Yang Chendong was his son-in-law, and as his father-in-law, he couldn't be indifferent when it came to performing. That's right, go back and tell the family that if there isn't anything important, they shouldn't go out. It's safer to stay in the residence. Hu Shao instructed Hu Changning again. Naturally, they had to pay more attention during this critical period. Yes, father, I'll arrange it in a moment. Hu Changning hurriedly responded. However, he didn't think so in his heart. In his opinion, he was an official of the embroidered uniform guard, and his father was the highly respected Minister of Rights. His students and old officials were all over the world, so who would find trouble with them? And it was this carelessness that doomed Hu Changning to suffer. Su Yozhen, like the other important officials, hurriedly returned to the residence after leaving the palace. However, halfway there, he sent out his most loyal butler. Not long after he returned to the residence, the butler returned. At the same time, he brought back a message: "Do what you normally do." These words naturally didn't come from the butler, but from the person the butler had gone to see. The intelligence agent Yang Qindong had left in the Baiming capital. Not even the two madams of the Yang clan knew that Yang Qindong had returned to the Baiming capital. It wasn't that he didn't trust them, but that he didn't want them to worry, so he had concealed everything. But Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't hide anything from the security bureau. He had even made arrangements for officials like Su Yozhen, who had secretly joined Yang Qindong. "Do what you normally do." Su Yozhen repeated the words several times in a row. Her face was cloudy and uncertain. It seemed that the sixth young master had already made preparations, and for his own safety, he didn't need to intervene. Thinking about the various things Yang Qindong had done and the various miracles he had created, Su Yozhen wasn't as panicked. But thinking about his recent actions, and how he had even rarely contacted the people of the security bureau, would that incur the displeasure of the Duke of Loyalty? Su Yozhen was a smart person, and he was very good at judging the situation. It was precisely because of this that when he saw the new army in Baiming gradually taking shape, his attitude changed, and he wanted to join Yang Qindong's ship. But when he heard that the Duke of Loyalty was coming to Baiming capital, he hesitated. In the imperial court, when he learned that Yang Qindong had only brought 200-some cavalry to the capital, he had been worried. Of course, only he knew whether he was worried about Yang Qindong's safety or whether he was worried that he would be implicated if Yang Qindong was captured. For this reason, he had been worried the entire way. He couldn't understand why Yang Qindong would take such a risk in such a good situation. Could it be that he wasn't afraid of death? But now, he was finally at ease. Since Yang Qindong had no intention of exposing him, he would just sit on the side and watch the show. He believed that since he had said so, the sixth young master wouldn't be in danger. In contrast to Su Yozhen's initial shock, Zhu Qiyu was glaring angrily at the three servants kneeling in front of him. These three were Great Eunuch Jining of the Ceremony Directorate, Commander Lu Gui of the Brocade Guard, and Deng Chang, the eunuch guarding the Xian residence. Chapter 787. Deng Chang was the guardian eunuch of the Xian manor, which was equivalent to patrolling the entire Xian manor for the emperor. But now, Yang Qindong had safely passed through the Xian manor without suffering any reprimand. Naturally, Zhu Qiyu would vent his anger on Deng Chang, the eunuch. Kneeling on the ground, Deng Chang trembled all over. At this moment, he hated Shi Wanshan to the core. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage had arrived in front of you, yet all you needed to do was speak and capture him, or even kill him. Why did you have to send him out of Xian City and into the capital? Wasn't this the same as trying to make the emperor look bad? Of course, at this moment, Deng Chang wasn't thinking about Shi Wanshan. In his view, whether the emperor was happy or not was always the most important thing. As for the officials below him, so what if they died? Servants would always be servants. Deng Chang was a member of the eunuch group. He was originally Jin Ying's subordinate. If a subordinate did something wrong, it was only right for him, the superior, to kneel and be punished. Moreover, Jining knew that the emperor was not in a good mood, so she didn't show any anger as she knelt on the ground. Lu Gui, on the other hand, had a wronged expression. Deng Chang being punished to kneel was only right and proper. The problem occurred in your Xian manor. You didn't resolve it properly and threw the problem in front of the emperor. If he didn't punish you, who would he punish? As for Jining, she was Deng Chang's superior, so it was only right for her to be punished. But he had no relationship with Deng Chang, so why did he have to be punished? Wasn't this too unjust? He was angry, but he didn't dare to vent it. Lu Gui knelt there with his head lowered, cursing in his heart. Zhu Qiyu sat high above, looking at the three people kneeling in front of him. He snorted. Do you know your crime? This subject knows his crime, Jining and Deng Chang hurriedly said. Just from the fact that they could call themselves subjects, one could imagine the power of the eunuch group. The two of them answered, and Lu Gui had no choice but to speak. This subject knows his crime. He spoke, but it was a beat too slow, causing his voice to be particularly conspicuous. What? Lu Gui, do you think you're innocent? Is your embroidered uniform guard really not at fault this time? The Duke of Zhongdan suddenly entered the Xian manor. Did your people report it? Is there any way to deal with it? On the way out of the Xian manor, there were countless checkpoints. What did the brocade guard do? Shouldn't I punish you? The emperor suddenly got angry and angrily scolded. Cold sweat flowed out from Lu Gui's head. Speaking of Yang Qindong's arrival at Xian Manor, the embroidered uniform guards stationed there were indeed aware of it. However, the problem was that before they could make any decisions, Shi Wanshan had sent Yang Qindong and the others away early the next morning, catching them off guard. As a result, by the time they wanted to send someone to follow them, there was already no trace of them. It was winter, and the northwest wind was blowing. The snow marks on the ground would soon disappear. Even the shadow of the person could not be tracked, so how could they take any action? But how could Lu Gui dare to say these words to the emperor? Wouldn't that prove his incompetence? At this moment, he could only obediently lower his head and accept the scolding. At this moment, he didn't feel so wronged. It seemed that it was natural for him to kneel here. The three people didn't resist or refute. Gradually, Dai Zong's anger dissipated. You all know what happened. Now, I'll give you a chance to make up for your mistakes. Who will tell me what you plan to do next? He was about to make a move. Lu Gui, who didn't perform well just now, quickly raised his head and said in a fierce voice, Your Majesty, leave this matter to this subject. I'll immediately send people to set up surveillance around the capital. I'll make sure that he's a corpse before he enters the capital. Moreover, I'll make sure that his hands and feet are done cleanly. No one will know. No one will know. Zhu Qiyu sneered. The Duke of Zhongdan has more than 200 cavalrymen by his side, and they all carry advanced firearms. Can you really eliminate all of them and not leave any trace? Ah. This. For a moment, Lu Gui didn't dare to make any guarantees. He already knew how powerful the mercenaries were. If it was just one person or a few people, it wasn't impossible to mobilize the elites of the embroidered uniform guard. But against more than 200 fully armed cavalrymen, if they wanted to deal with them, they would need to mobilize many embroidered uniform guards. Perhaps even 1,000 men wouldn't be enough. And once they mobilized more people, it would be extremely difficult to keep the news from spreading. The embroidered uniform guard had too many officials' family members serving in it. The various departments should also have people in them. To mobilize so many people without being noticed was basically an impossible task. After being choked by Dai Zong, Lu Gui lowered his head and didn't say anything. But this reminded Jining that he had thought of something. Your Majesty, the Duke of Zhongdan isn't easy to deal with. If we don't hit him, we'll have to bear a great risk. But that doesn't mean that we can't touch the others. When Zhu Qiyu heard the first part of Jin Ying's words, his face showed displeasure. But when he heard the latter part, his spirit was lifted. He knew that this highly regarded head eunuch must have thought of something. Oh, tell me about it. Although we can't directly touch the Duke of Zhongdan, we can use other people to probe his thoughts. This way, we can indirectly obtain some results. After all, the Duke of Zhongdan is Lord Yang Rong's youngest son. In the capital, he has close connections to all sorts of people. For example, he has 10 some older brothers and sisters. No. This action is too obvious. Zhu Qiyu didn't even wait for Jining to finish speaking and immediately refused. Yang Qindong had older brothers and sisters in the capital, but touching them was no different from touching Yang Qindong. More importantly, this person could sacrifice his family. Baiming would not only gain nothing, but would also easily offend him. Jining understood the emperor's meaning. Even though he had been interrupted, he didn't show any displeasure. On the contrary, he smiled and said, "Just as your majesty says, we truly can't use these family members. It's too obvious. But there are some people who aren't close to him, so we can use them to make a fuss. At the very least, we can test his bottom line." Without any intention of making Dai's zone wait, he gave a name. This time, Zhu Qiyu didn't immediately refuse. Instead, he fell into deep thought. Then, he turned his gaze to Lu Gui, a questioning look on his face. His previous performance had already been very bad. He was afraid that he had incurred the emperor's displeasure. Now that he finally had a chance to perform, how could Lu Gui miss it? He nodded and said, "This person is fine. He was originally a member of the Brocade Guard. It's too easy to find fault with him. But his father is the current court." Knowing what Lu Gui was afraid of, Zhu Qiyu decisively shook his head. "It's fine. Didn't you say that the Brocade Guard doesn't need to ask for a reason when arresting people? Don't you need to look at the other party's status? Since that's the case, just do it according to the old rules." Understood. Lu Gui was naturally a smart person to be able to reach his position. He nodded and said, "Rest assured, Your Majesty. This subject will definitely handle this matter beautifully." Finally, there was a countermeasure. Zhu Qiyu's expression relaxed a lot. No matter what, Yang Chendong had returned to the capital of Baiming. The initiative was in his hands. He should be worried about the other party, not himself. He also wanted to use this time to take a good look at the thoughts of these officials. He also wanted to know who to put in important positions in the future and who to push to the side and be completely marginalized. Gao Sheng, Baihu of the Brocade Guard, was the trusted aide of the Brocade Guard's town supervisor, Hu Changming. Relying on his relationship with the Hu clan, Gao Sheng was like a fish in water in the Brocade Guard. His relationship with his colleagues had always been good. This was only relative. Everyone knew that the family rules of the Brocade Guard were extremely strict. One moment, everyone could be drinking together, hugging each other's neck, and calling each other brothers. The next moment, the two of them would fight to the death. Although he knew of this rule, Gao Sheng never thought that he would have such a day. Putting aside the fact that he had a big tree to rely on, the Hu clan had never lacked money thanks to the Duke of Loyalty. Often, the Tianwai Trading Company would send people to send them money and things. He also benefited from this. He did not lack money, and his lack of greed made his position extremely high. There would not be anything that could be used against him in the outside world. However, when Gao Sheng, who believed that he was honest and had never done anything wrong, stepped into the Brocade Guard's main gate one morning, he saw 4 fierce-looking men surrounding him. His intuition told him that things were not good. As he shouted out his identity, he thought about how to get out of the gate and find another way. However, how could the embroidered uniform guards not think of this? Before Gao Sheng could put his thoughts into action, the embroidered uniform guards surrounded him and pressed him to the ground without any explanation. Then, a black cloth was placed over his head and he was taken to the embroidered uniform guards' imperial prison. 4 hours later, at noon, when the streets of the capital were still bustling with activity, a group of embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes, black gauze hats, imperial belts, and wielding embroidered spring sabers could be seen aggressively traversing the streets. This lineup caused many commoners and even some officials to hurriedly make way for them. This was the Brocade Guard. They did not need any evidence to arrest people. Sometimes, even when killing people, they did not need to follow so many rules. They really did not know who had offended them this time. Which family was going to suffer this time? The crowd made way for the Brocade Guard to walk past them. A few busybodies even followed behind the Brocade Guard, wanting to see what was going on. Not long after, they saw a scene that shocked them. This group of Brocade Guard actually came to the residence of the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao, and loudly smashed the door. You're tuning in to the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.